Chapter 612. The leading man smiled and held the gift box in his hand. Really? Gongju coldly looked at the man who suddenly appeared in the square. Who knows if he and Qiu Zhongchan are in cahoots? Who are you? And who are you to give the gift? Gong Dai asked coldly. Before the man could answer, Qiu Zhongchan could not hold it in anymore. What happened? Xue Qianzhong, didn't you say that my wife and son were killed by Gong Dai? But Wu Shi is not dead. How dare you lie to me? Uncle, that's where you're wrong. Aunt isn't dead yet. He smiled and looked at Gong Yimo's direction with a pale face, but Aunt was used by them to test medicine. She is dying. If she was lucky just now, but after Qiu Zhongchan called out Xue Qianzhong's name, Gong Yimo's heart sank. She almost wanted to vomit blood. Aunt. Uncle. So she guessed correctly. That Xue Se from the Xue clan was her masked father. Xue Se did not lie at all. He had a son. She had an unloved half-brother, Xue Qianzhong. She thought of the 4 brothers of the Li family who had been protecting her in her previous life, and Xue Qianzhong who was standing in front of her, and the other 3 who were following behind him silently. They were not brothers at all, they were just his clansmen. She felt colder and colder. Even her toes were cold. These people had been hiding by her side for more than 10 years. They had no conspiracy. Could they be trusted? What is going on? As soon as he heard that Xue Wu Shi was about to die, Qiu Zhongchan sternly questioned Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was restless and didn't speak. Gong Ju ignored Qiu Zhongchan and questioned Xue Qianzhong instead. Who is Xue Se to you? The man smiled and his light brown eyes looked past Gong Dai and landed on Gong Yimo. He's my good-for-nothing father. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. At this time, Gong Yimo suddenly walked out. She walked past Gong Dai and stopped in front of Xue Qianzhong. Her expression was very serious. Very, very serious. What's your goal? What? Xue Qianzhong smiled as she looked at her famous sister whom she had never met before, and asked in confusion. Gong Yimo looked at the extremely familiar face in front of her. Anger surged in her heart, but she held it in and said softly, Snow's goal is to find a way to control me, obtain power, and even restore the country. What about you? What is your goal for appearing here? Xue Qianzhong squinted his eyes as a trace of darkness flashed across his eyes. He lifted the box in his hand again. I'm here to give you a gift. At this moment, Qiu Zhongchan couldn't help but ask, Gong Yimo, didn't you say that Wu Shi didn't die? Then where is she? Return her to me. But this time, Gong Yimo looked at him impatiently. Gong Dai felt that something was wrong with Gong Yimo. He quickly grabbed Gong Yimo's hand and said to Lo Qi impatiently, Give that crazy woman to him and ask him to leave. Yes. Gong Dai didn't want to argue with Qiu Zhongchan. Looking at the royal sister's expression, it was obvious that these people were more difficult to deal with. Could it be that they couldn't get rid of this little remnant of snow country? Xue Wu Shi was quickly brought up. Gong Yimo looked at Xue Qianzhong coldly. Then she carried the injured Xue Wu Shi to Qiu Zhongchan and said word by word. Take your woman and get out. Also, I don't know where your child is. Qiu Zhongchan trembled with anger when he saw Xue Wu Shi. Gong Dai sneered, the injuries on her body were caused by herself when she went crazy. If you dare to attack her again, you might as well die here. Gong Yimo looked at the unconscious Xue Wu Shi and sneered, It's a happy day, it's better not to see blood. But I'm afraid that someone wants to die. What do you think? Zhenren Qiu. Her mind was in a mess. Qiu Zhongchan wanted to interfere. Don't blame her for not caring about their old friendship. Qiu Zhongchan was threatened by the 2 of them and could only swallow his anger. After all, he was no match for Gong Dai and Gong Yimo when they joined forces. So he asked Xue Qianzhong angrily, Where's your sister? Didn't she leave with you? Why is she missing? Xue Qianzhong pointed at Gong Yimo and said maliciously, Uncle, look at the princess's clothes. It's so beautiful. Isn't it made by my sister? Gong Dai's face changed. He suddenly stared at Gong Yimo's wedding dress. Impossible, he had carefully checked this wedding gown. There was no problem at all. Xue Qianzhong seemed to understand what he was thinking. He sneered, Don't worry. There's no problem with her wedding dress. Then, was the problem with his wedding dress? Gong Dai's face turned green, but he had checked his clothes. There was nothing poisonous. Could it be that he let someone take advantage of the time? Come, take them down. Gong Ju couldn't figure out if the other party had really done something, but he wasn't a passive person. He immediately ordered Li Xiu to be brought over, and wanted to arrest all these people. If there really was an accident, all of them would die here. Gong Dai's elite subordinates lived up to their reputation. Xue Qianzhong knew that he was no match for them. His palms were wet. The feeling of being so close to death was really exciting. Thinking of this, he smiled even more gently. Li Xiuxiu was brought up quickly. She looked at Gong Dai timidly. She was held by people, but she seemed to be fearless. She did not cry. What did you do? It was hard for a person to smell his own body. Gong Yimo felt that there was a fragrance on his body. It was also the kind that was faintly discernible. Xue Qianzhong looked at the guards who were staring at him. He held the box in his hand and said with a smile, "Your Highness, you've misunderstood. I wouldn't dare to poison you. I just had my younger sister soak the embroidery thread in rosemary incense when she was embroidering your clothes. That thing is harmless and hard to get even with 1,000 gold. However, the best incense will only make people drowsy and remember many things of the past, and this kind of incense would only evaporate when it was hot. So it was normal that people did not find it. But if Li Xiuxiu did something to Gong Yimo's wedding dress, Gong Dai would definitely find it immediately. Because although he was very busy during this period, Gong Yimo had done a very strict check on everything. He did not expect that even a wise man would make a mistake. The one who made the mistake was himself. Gong Dai clenched his fists tightly. His fierce eyes fell on Li Xiuxiu, making her tense up. So much time had passed. He and the royal sister must have been disturbed by the incense. Although the incense was not poisonous, the other party's intention was not simple. Gong Yimo reached out and held Gong Dai's hand. "Tell me, what do you want to do?" Chapter 613. Xue Qianzhong smiled. "Nothing. I just want you to not be so noble, to remember the pain you went through." But when he saw Gong Yimo's expression become more and more unfriendly, as if she had a huge grudge against him, he was shocked and quickly changed his words. "It's just a joke. This is a gift from brother to you. The rosemary incense is hard to find, don't you like it? Although rosemary incense would cause people to have nightmares, it would stimulate people's negative emotions, but it smelled very good, it was hard to find, and it was very popular. So even if she was found out, and Li Xiu said that she did something to it, she could refute that it was just the incense. But how could Gong Yimo believe that? This man had lied to her for more than 10 years in her previous life. What was his purpose? Why did he want to hide by her side? He really made her feel very uncomfortable. Gong Yimo did not realize that she was losing control of her emotions. No one would be able to tolerate this, right? Brothers who had been through life and death together for more than 10 years, suddenly realized that they might have other motives. They did not want anything, they did not ask for anything. What were they after? She tried to suppress the restlessness in her heart, coldly looked at Xue Qianzhong, her eyes were red. "What is your purpose? I will ask you one last time, why did you come to me? If you don't tell me, you can go die." Between the words, there was a deep hostility. Gong Dai saw that the royal sister was different, he called her name, but she still stared at him, as if there was an irreconcilable hatred. Who were these people from the Snow Clan? Why did the royal sister seem to know them? Xue Qianzhong frowned. He always felt that his sister seemed to know the future, and saw through him at one glance. He looked at the silent Snow Clan people behind him, and said in a joking tone, with a bit of madness, "Father wants the world, he wants power, but I am different. I want you, because you are very powerful. I want very little, I only want the world to be in chaos." He licked his lips, saying something that no one could tell the truth from the lies. "Are you satisfied with this answer?" Gong Yimo closed her eyes. "Kill them." Gong Dai waved his hand, and his subordinates immediately acted. Their killing intent was obvious, and they did not hesitate at all. This was the first time Gong Dai felt such a strong killing intent from Gong Yimo. It was as if those people had betrayed her deeply. Do they know each other? Royal sister. How many more secrets did she have that he didn't know? No wonder Gong Yimo was so murderous. Because she knew at a glance whether Xue Qianzhong was lying. After all, they had known each other for more than 10 years, so they knew each other quite well. From the moment Xue Qianzhong said the words chaos in the world, she deeply felt that this was his goal. There was no mistake. No wonder, in these 10 years, they didn't want anything, they didn't ask for anything, because they had long since gotten what they wanted. They enjoyed the slaughter, they enjoyed the chaos. The world was in chaos. This was their goal. It was funny that she had never doubted them for more than 10 years, because they really had nothing else to ask for. In her previous life, after she died, Xue Qianzhong and the rest were still alive, but in her previous life, there was the Great Regent, so she was not worried. But in this life, these people dared to provoke her again. This was unforgivable. Xue Qianzhong obviously did not expect that his half-true and half-false words would make Gong Yimo have such a big reaction. Luckily, Qiu Zhongchan carried Xue Wuxi in time to protect him, so he escaped from death, but a few of his clansmen died in an instant. What nonsense are you talking about? What are you doing here? If you continue to speak like this, do you want to die here? Xue Qianzhong's expression changed a few times, thinking of the proper business. Then he stopped smiling and said seriously, "Sister, actually I am here to take you away. Don't you want to see your mother? She misses you a lot." His words shocked Gong Yimo. Gong Dai heard this, suddenly waved his hand, and everyone stopped. "What did you say?" The smell of fresh blood filled the air, his words were filled with killing intent. Didn't Xue Qianzhong die long ago? She was poisoned to death by his mother. His mother died because of this. He was also implicated, and was banished to the cold palace. Now that he heard that Xue Qianzhong was not dead, his heart tightened, and he suddenly had a terrible idea. Xue Qianzhong was talking to Gong Yimo on the surface, but in fact, he had been staring at Gong Dai's expression. Seeing that he had a reaction, he said even more maliciously, "Yes, Auntie Lian is not dead, she is the holy lady of the Snow Clan. How could she be poisoned to death? You know, she has been taking all kinds of drugs since she was young. If someone wanted to harm her, she would immediately know. How could she be tricked?" Xue Qianzhong's words made Gong Dai's face turn even uglier. "So, your mother's little tricks were not enough. At that time, Auntie Lian needed to die to escape, and coincidentally, your mother came to her, so she beat her at her own game, and secretly increased the dosage of the poison. Otherwise, with the dosage that your cowardly mother put in, it would not be enough to kill anyone." Gong Dai suddenly felt a pain in his heart. Many images of his mother began to flash in his mind, the tragic death, the cold palace, and the painful images. Rosemary was like this, it did not harm you when you did not want to, but as long as you had negative thoughts, those thoughts would come like a tide, so clear that it was suffocating. Xue Qianzhong continued. "Auntie Lian and my father were the same, they both took the poison and the antidote. All the poisons in the world will not have any effect on them, but because of their special physique, when the poison in their body accumulates to a certain extent, they will fall into a state of suspended animation, and will wake up when the poison is gradually expelled. This is also why people say that there is a secret method to resurrect people in the Snow Clan's treasure, and also why my father could escape death, because they were not dead at all, just suspended animation." After Gong Yimo came back to her senses, she only felt that her brain was hot. A fire was burning in her heart, almost swallowing her. What else was not fake? What else was there? She wanted to laugh, because she suddenly felt that everything around her was fake, everything was fake. "Xue Qianzhong." Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes, and said in a low voice, "My mother died long ago, her body is in the imperial tomb." Xue Qianzhong smiled deeply, and was very calm. Dai Yu State's emperor is about to enter the imperial tomb. At that time, sister, you can see for yourself whether I am lying to you or not," he said solemnly, which made Gong Yimo more and more uneasy. She could not help but look at Gong Dai. If Gong Dai's mother's death was because his mother wanted to leave the palace, and pushed the boat to Gong Dai's mother, then Gong Dai's mother did not die in vain. In other words, Gong Dai should have had a happy childhood, and also had a mother who loved him. But all of this was destroyed by his mother. "Sister, listen to your brother, go back with me, you two are not suitable, after all, there is hatred between you two." Without thinking, he grabbed her hand tightly. He hated this person, but the other party's identity put him in a difficult position, so he could only grab the other party's hand. He didn't care, but would royal sister care if she knew that she had a mother? Considering this point, Gong Dai could only glare fiercely at the other party. You guys can get lost. Royal sister won't go with you. Xue Qianzhong was in disbelief. Prince Qi, don't you understand? Xue Qianzhong was still afraid of this person. He couldn't help but laugh. If it wasn't for Auntie Lian, your gentle mother wouldn't have been poisoned to death. If it wasn't for her, you wouldn't have been banished to the cold palace. All your sufferings came from this. So, you still want to marry her daughter? As he spoke, he said to Gong Yimo, whose cheeks were slightly red. Sister, are you also resisting? This man said that he doesn't mind now, but who knows if he will use this matter as a raft in the future? Will he abandon you after playing with you enough? You should go back with your brother. Ah! He suddenly exclaimed. It turned out that Gong Dai grabbed his hand and exerted force. He let out a blood-curdling scream as the box in his hand fell to the ground. The box opened and a broken hand fell out. Gong Yimo's tense body also opened up because of this sound. She suddenly opened her eyes and saw the thing inside. Her pupils shrank. It was a blue and purple skinny hand. There was a gold thumb ring on the finger. The dragon carved on it was lifelike. Gong Yimo, who had been silent, suddenly moved. She bent down and didn't care about the fan that fell to the ground. Instead, she picked up the broken hand. This thumb ring, when she put it in the coffin yesterday, she saw it on Father Emperor's body. This hand, could it be Father Emperor's? When she thought of Gong Cheng's body that was so thin that it was out of shape, his bones that would ache when he moved, and after his death, his face that was blue and purple, his eyes and lips that couldn't close, Gong Yimo couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air to suppress the feeling of her heart being tightly clenched by a hand. Her fingers suddenly clenched tightly. She almost couldn't breathe. That man, he knew that he was going to die, but he still remembered her marriage and specially allowed her to get married first before the funeral. That man regarded the country as his everything, but in the end, he chose to let her live. And when he died, his body was not complete. A hand appeared here. That meant Xue Qianzhong. Gong Yimo's eyes gradually became bloodshot as she looked at him coldly. In her previous life, he used her for more than 10 years and it was not enough. In this life, he still wanted to sow discord between her and Gong Dai. In order to achieve his goal, he didn't even let off a dead person and even cut off his hand. Father Emperor was a hero, but in the end, he ended up like this because of her. Even his body couldn't be preserved because of her. Xue Qianzhong was grabbed by Gong Dai and he was in so much pain that cold sweat came out. This was his last step, using the emperor's body to threaten Gong Yimo. If it wasn't because everyone was busy with the wedding and the funeral, he wouldn't have the chance to know what that man looked like when he died. He said with a ferocious face, "Sister, I heard that you are very filial to this man who destroyed our country." Xue Qianzhong sneered, "How about this? If you leave with me now, I will immediately return the body and let him rest in peace. But if you don't leave with me, I guarantee that he will immediately be torn apart by 5 horses and fed to the dogs." When Gong Dai heard that Xue Qianzhong wanted to use his father's body to threaten him and even wanted to kidnap his wife, he used his strength and crippled one of his hand. A scream was heard. But in the next second, a gust of wind passed by and Gong Dai's hand suddenly became empty. Because Gong Yimo suddenly grabbed Xue Qianzhong's collar and slammed him onto the wall. There was a loud bang. Xue Qianzhong, who was injured on his back, spat out a mouthful of blood. Gong Dai was shocked and thought that something was wrong. He saw Gong Yimo's hair fluttering without wind. Through the golden bead tassel, her eyes were bloodshot as she stared fiercely at Xue Qianzhong. "Who gave you the guts?" Her chest was violently moving up and down as if she was gasping for breath. That voice seemed to come from her throat. Who gave you the guts?" Chapter 6:15. Xue Qianzhong was shocked by her reaction. He swallowed the blood in his mouth and felt that he couldn't breathe. He only wanted to use the rosemary incense to destroy their relationship, destroy the wedding and take Gong Yimo away, If Gong Dai knew the truth and gave up Gong Yimo voluntarily, then she would be disheartened and completely betray Dai Yu state. If Gong Dai didn't give up on her, then he would use the emperor's corpse to threaten her. He knew that Gong Yimo was very filial to the emperor of Dai Yu state. Even if it was for the emperor's corpse, she should go with them. As long as she went with them, they would have many ways to bewitch her. But now, she seemed to be different from what he expected. Where did she lose control? He actually made her go crazy. It seemed like the poison was about to take effect. How was this possible? He knew that the rosemary incense would make people have negative emotions, but the matter between Xuelian and the emperor shouldn't make her go crazy. This was called man proposes, God disposes. The rosemary incense didn't have much effect. It could only add fuel to the fire. But he didn't know that Gong Yimo had a previous life. He didn't know that the matter that he hid for more than 10 years in his previous life was exposed in this life. Since he appeared, Gong Yimo's emotions became very unstable. And the matter with Xuelian had made her even more agitated. Now, he dared to use the emperor's corpse to threaten her. It was the last straw that broke the camel's back. It made her completely crazy. She suddenly raised her head and screamed. Her fingers pierced into Xue Qianzhong's body. Xue Qianzhong finally knew fear. He endured the pain and screamed, "Uncle!" And Gong Dai immediately rushed forward and tried to knock Gong Yimo out. But Gong Yimo seemed to know his intention. She turned back and stared at him fiercely. She didn't listen to many of Xue Qianzhong's words. But she heard one sentence: even if Gong Dai loved her now and didn't care that her mother harmed his mother and him, he would care in the future. Scram! Gong Yimo's eyes were red, but she still seemed to be rational. She grabbed Gong Dai's outstretched hand tightly as if she wanted to crush his bones. Gong Dai said hurriedly when he saw that she was still rational, "Royal sister, look at me, I'm Gong Dai. Calm down, don't let those negative emotions devour your rationality." Qiu Zhongchan also took the chance to save the dying Xue Qianzhong from Gong Yimo. When he saw Xue Qianzhong's chest caved in, he gasped and said to Gong Yimo in disbelief, "How can you do this? He's your only brother." Gong Yimo only felt the fire in her body surging. "Brother?" She sneered, the corners of her eyes turning red. "He's a liar. He deserves to die." Gong Dai also realized that she was extremely angry at Xue Qianzhong. He didn't care about his hand that was being held tightly. He used his other hand to force her head to focus her eyes and raise her head to look at him. "Royal sister, calm down. You still have your rationality, right? Look at me, don't you remember me? Gong Dai." Strangely, she actually called out Gong Dai's name. Gong Dai was happy and couldn't help but laugh. Who knew that Gong Yimo, who was in his arms, suddenly said with a resentful tone, "How can I not remember you?" Gong Yimo stared at Gong Dai. The effect of the rosemary started to work. It kept flipping through the memories of hatred in her mind when Gong Yimo was trying her best to suppress the poison. Originally, she had her rationality and would control herself to say something she shouldn't say. But now, all of her rationality was controlling her power that was about to go out of control. The rosemary took advantage of this and evoked the deepest memories in her heart. Memories that were filled with blood, scars, and cruelty. Gong Dai clearly felt that Gong Yimo was restraining herself. But her tone was so strange. Although the hand that grabbed his hand slowly loosened, the eyes that looked at him became fiercer. "I clearly remember how you inflicted those tortures on me, torturing me to death. I remember how you made me a mere figurehead, how you forced me to achieve your goal. A golden millet dream, a dream of a lifetime. And in that lifetime, you were my nightmare." Gong Dai was confused. His eyes stared at the woman in his arms. "Royal sister, what are you saying? How can I kill you? Why is it impossible?" Gong Yimo suddenly pushed him away. In the huge courtyard, all of the guards were shocked by Gong Yimo's gaze and retreated. At this time, because they had stayed in the courtyard for too long, Gong Che finally came out to check on the situation. But when he saw Gong Yimo's abnormal state, he suddenly remembered how she looked when she was about to go crazy. What's going on? He was shocked. She was fine just now. What happened now? His voice attracted Gong Yimo's gaze. Then, she laughed. Her laughter was shrill. Her red dress followed her stumbling footsteps. Because she didn't notice, the chains rubbed against the ground and made an unpleasant sound. You. Gong Yimo suddenly looked at Gong Che. I loved and protected you in my previous life. But because you listened to slander, you guarded against me and persecuted me. What a joke. What a good person. Gong Yimo slowly turned around. Her gaze landed on the unconscious Xue Qianzhong and the frightened Xue clan members. They were all staring at her nervously. And you. Cowards. Your country was destroyed. You deserve it. You don't want to live a good life, but you want the world to be in chaos. You want the world to suffer what you have suffered. You are twisted and cowardly. Pathetic and hateful, shameful. The last two words were squeezed out from the gaps of her teeth. She stared at Xue Qianzhong faintly, comrades who have been through fire and water for more than 10 years. I thought you were my only comfort. I didn't expect that you are my brother. What a good brother. So disgusting. Her gaze turned around and finally landed on Gong Dai. What kind of look was that? Her eyes were bloodshot, but Gong Ju could only see her helplessness and despair. He thought that the royal sister was talking crazy. But these words strangely connected with some of the things he had thought of before. Especially when he saw Gong Che's face suddenly turn pale, he seemed to have caught some kind of truth. And you, Gong Yimo gradually calmed down. Her silence made everyone around her not dare to move or make a sound. You hurt me so much. So painful, ah. Every time she said a word, she would use her finger to poke her chest. She tilted her head and looked at him with misty eyes. I am your opponent. You should be unscrupulous. But I have to bear all these tricks. I feel so uncomfortable. I can't explain myself. No one believes me. I can only stay silent and bear it. Chapter 616. Everyone doesn't like me. When I help others, they scold me. When I do good deeds, no one supports me. My heart hurts. Her aggrieved and choked voice makes Gong Dai's eyes turn red instantly. Royal sister. I'm not your royal sister. Gong Yimo suddenly flings her hand and says coldly, I'm not like you, who knows how to play politics and manipulate people's hearts. No matter how much I do, it can't compare to your words and schemes. But I really want to do good deeds. I want to redeem everything. I regret it. If only I didn't go down the mountain. I killed so many people. Kim Yoon died for me. Sai Wuyen was forced by me to take poison to commit suicide. I burned down Dragon City Wuji. I took over so many cities and trampled on so much land. Mountains of corpses and seas of fire. I'm so scared. Her eyes are filled with tears. Her hands suddenly hug herself tightly in panic. Her eyes are bloodshot and ferocious, but it makes one's heart ache. I'm a sinner. I clenched my teeth and did everything to gain recognition. But why do you want to make me a mere figurehead, and kill me? I'm so wronged. I just wanted to simply love someone. Why do you want to kill me? It's you. You broke my fingers one by one, and my toes. You broke every bone in my body. You want to hear me beg for mercy. That iron comb combed my body until there's not a single piece of flesh left intact. Gong Dai. I'm in so much pain. Royal sister. Gong Dai suddenly steps forward and hugs her tightly. He hugged her tightly in his arms, who was panicking and scared. He didn't do those things. He can't do such unforgivable things to the woman he loves. You even let someone use a sword to pierce my throat. I didn't die at that time. I had to slowly bleed out before I suffocated to death. It's so painful. I'll never forget it. Gong Dai didn't notice that when Gong Yimo said this, her voice was no longer trembling. Her eyes were staring at a spot. At that moment, she was silent. My life was such a failure. My husband betrayed me. I had no friends, no children. I was despised and cursed by the people. In the end, I was tortured to death. Gradually, there was no light in her eyes, but a dagger had appeared in her hand at some unknown time. Sometimes I think, I'm living in hell. Gong Che saw this and couldn't help but shout. Gong Dai, be careful. But Gong Yimo's hand. At that moment, Gongju didn't avoid her, he just hugged her tightly. If you want to stab me, then stab me. He lowers his head and whispers. His hand tightened, as if he wanted to embed her into his body. Gong Yimo's body trembled. What you said isn't true. If it's true, then I deserve to die. It doesn't matter if it's 1 stab or 2. Even if you kill me, I won't have any complaints. Gong Yimo's eyes were fixed on a spot. Her raised hand was trembling slightly behind his back. She seemed to be in a struggle. On one side, she was suffering from unquenchable resentment. On the other side, she wanted to let go of everything and start anew. She wanted to fall and hope, kill and redeem. She had never been in such a struggle before. Because of this struggle, her rationality used all her strength to prevent herself from hurting Gong Dai. However, her body was gradually being taken over by the venomous parasite. At this moment, Gong Dai wanted to seize the opportunity to knock her out. But before he could do it, Gong Yimo seemed to have sensed something and pushed him away. What are you doing to me? She hisses and questions. The trembling of fear, resentment, and calmness were all shattered in an instant. Her eyes were ferocious. Like a trapped beast, she stared fiercely at Gong Dai. She clenches her teeth tightly, as if she wanted to pierce his arteries. Momo, Gong Dai did not succeed. Furthermore, Gong Yimo was instantly alerted. He felt uneasy and wanted to approach her again. Don't come over. Gong Yimo screamed in shock and retreated. The moment she retreated, the guards behind her were forced away by her surging murderous aura. She instantly distanced herself from Gong Dai. All right. I won't go over. Momo, don't go. Gong Dai stood on the spot nervously. He looked at her with pleading eyes. Gong Yimo's murderous aura was getting stronger. This was a sign that she could no longer maintain her rationality. Don't, follow me, she shouted at Gong Dai ferociously. However, Gong Dai could feel that she was protecting him. I can't not follow you. Momo, you are my wife. Today is our big day. I beg you, don't go. Gong Dai had never pleaded like this before. He put down all his dignity and face to persuade her to stay and try to wake her up. Wake up, okay? Momo, you said you loved me. Fell in love with someone who killed me? Gong Yimo suddenly smiled strangely. That smile contained all her struggles. Fell in love with him, admitted that she had fallen in love with him, decided to be with him. Every step was a struggle. Sometimes, I really feel sad for myself. I actually fell in love with someone who tortured and killed me. She laughed and then suddenly pursed her lips. No one knew what she thought of. Her eyes gradually filled with a murderous aura and finally became cold. She slowly stretched out her hand and pulled hard. She actually broke the buttons on her crown and took off the phoenix crown that was the culmination of countless efforts. In an instant, her black hair flew up. Her clothes were as red as blood. Even the corners of her eyes were a sinister red. Her actions shocked Gong Dai. His face turned pale. Momo, what are you doing? She slowly curled her lips and loosened her hand. In the next second, the crown fell onto the limestone floor. You are not my husband. I don't want to marry you anymore. After saying that, she turned around and left. At that moment, the ferocious energy in her body almost tore her body apart. When she said those words, she was actually sober. So be it. She was such an unstable woman. She could blow herself up, but she could not hurt Gong Dai. Even if he was her enemy in her previous life. When she pinched the crown, she suddenly made a decision in her heart. She wanted to kill herself while she still had her reason. So she resolutely turned around and threw away the phoenix crown with this man. No. You can't leave. He could not let her leave like this. Otherwise, he might not be able to see her again in this lifetime. This thought suddenly flashed through Gong Dai's mind. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not turn back, he finally clenched his teeth and ordered to capture her. Gong Dai's entanglement and the guard's obstruction made Gong Yimo even more irritable. Waves of sharp screams made everyone in the wedding hall understand that the princess seemed to have gone crazy again. They did not dare to go out. They could only pray that Prince Chi could control her. Otherwise, The only solution was to shoot thousands of arrows and kill that monster. How could Gong Dai bear to do that? Chapter 617. Gong Yimo gradually stopped talking. She seemed to still have some rationality left, but she was already killing people and she was getting more and more ruthless. No matter what, he could not let her go. He could not. Momo. Finally, after killing a lot of people, Gong Ju faced off against her. At this moment, her eyes were completely red. It was hard to tell how much rationality she had left, but her killing intent was increasing. It was obvious that she was getting more and more dangerous. Let go. Her eyes could only see red and black. These two words were shouted out with all her strength under her ferocious expression. You can't leave. Gong Dai had already calmed down. He was also dressed in red, but he was like an unsheathed sword, firmly blocking in front of Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo could no longer speak. She directly attacked. The chains on her body restrained her, but when she used all her strength, the chains instantly broke. Gong Dai was not a match for the crazy Gong Yimo. Furthermore, he only wanted to knock her out and did not kill her. It was even more impossible for him to defeat her. In a moment of desperation, Gong Dai was filled with hatred as he coldly said to Qiu Zhongchan, help me keep her here. Otherwise, all of you can go and die. In the face of Gong Ju's threat, Qiu Zhongchan decided to join the battle. His wife and daughter were still alive, but because of Xue Qianzhong, they ruined Qi Wang's wedding. If he didn't do anything, he was afraid that Gong Yimo would run away. Qi Wang would have nowhere to vent his anger and kill them. With Qiu Zhongchan's participation, Gong Dai felt much more relaxed. However, he still cared about Gong Yimo and coldly asked Qiu Zhongchan to only knock her out and not hurt her. Seeing that the few of them were not giving up, Gong Yimo's last bit of rationality also collapsed. She finally exploded like a wild beast. She directly used the chains to break Qiu Zhongchan's hand that was holding the sword. She then used a palm to push Gong Dai away and ran towards a direction like an arrow. Royal sister. Gong Dai clutched his chest and shouted. However, Gong Yimo did not even turn her head. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Gong Che quickly sent people to chase after him and then helped him up. Are you okay? Gong Che saw that although Mo was crazy, she seemed to be rational towards Gong Dai. At this moment, Mo did not care about anything and wanted to leave because she could not control herself. Just like when she hit Gong Dai, she did not hold back. Gong Dai struggled to get up. Gong Che could not help but ask, what are you doing? Go after her. Gong Dai said without hesitation. Gong Che panicked. Don't tell me you don't want to live anymore. Who knew that Gong Ju would suddenly stare at her with scarlet eyes? Royal sister wants to die. She can't control herself. She will definitely kill herself. I have to stop her. After saying that, he did not care about Gong Che's expression and directly led people to chase after her. At this moment, Gong Che could no longer care about the situation and shouted, Gong Dai. Gong Dai did not turn around. Gong Che panicked and took 2 steps forward. He quickly said, Gong Dai. She's pregnant. Moa is pregnant. What did you say? This time, Gong Dai finally reacted. He instantly appeared in front of Gong Che, full of disbelief. Gong Che said firmly, I'm not lying to you. Yesterday, father wanted to bury Mo with him. However, when he found out that she was pregnant, he let her go. Hurry up and save her. At this moment, Gong Dai did not care why Gong Che did not mention this earlier. Royal sister was pregnant. She was pregnant with his child. Their child. Thinking about how royal sister wanted to eat plums in the middle of the night, but felt that they were not sour enough, Gong Dai was shocked and scared. He did not care about anything else and ran after Gong Yimo. After Gong Che said that, he stood there in a daze for a while. He thought that if Moa really could not control herself, she might really commit suicide. In his panic, he also led people to follow after her. Gong Yimo was like the wind as she walked across the rooftops. Her eyes were fixed on one place and she used all her strength to control herself so that she would not go on a killing spree in the city. Gong Dai could not catch up to her no matter how hard he tried. However, if he used all his strength, he would not lose her. However, The more he walked, the more frightened he became. Wasn't this the direction of the cross stairway to heaven? The cross stairway to heaven was a sacred place in Dayu State. The stairway to heaven was actually a cliff. Below it was the surging Longtung River and the bottomless 9-step stairway. Legend had it that it was the place where the gods ascended to heaven. At this thought, Gong Dai became even more anxious. He tried his best to keep up with Gong Yimo. Unknowingly, the distance between him and his subordinates had widened. Finally, they left the city. The surrounding houses became fewer and fewer, and more trees appeared. That fear followed him like a shadow. In the end, his premonition came true. He really did reach the cross stairway to heaven. This was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that there were too many trees here. Gong Yimo disappeared the moment she arrived here. He could not find her. Gong Dai panicked. At this moment, Lo Chi and the rest had not arrived yet. He was alone and looked around blankly. He suddenly felt that he did not know where to go. "Royal sister," he shouted. Countless echoes came from the forest, but no one responded. She had disappeared. Disappeared? Gong Dai pursed his lips tightly. Suddenly, he looked at the highest point of the mountain and ran quickly. Royal sister was pregnant. She was pregnant. If she knew, she would not have tried to kill herself. Therefore, Gong Dai shouted as he ran, "Royal sister, come out. I'm Gong Dai." He looked around, completely ignoring the sweat on his forehead. "Don't be afraid, royal sister. We will bear the consequences together." There was still no response. Gong Dai continued to shout as he ran up the mountain. "Royal sister, we have a child. Royal sister, we have a child." When he shouted these words, Gong Dai only felt unbearable heartache. Too many thoughts floated in his mind. He suddenly felt that he had been wrong all this time. He had made a lot of mistakes. When he thought about what Gong Yimo said, Gong Dai understood everything. If he had really tortured and killed royal sister in his previous life, but in this life, she still chose to help him. In the cold palace, she reluctantly applied medicine for him, but couldn't help but soften her heart and save him time and time again. Why was she so silly? If it were him, he would have killed his enemy in the cradle, regardless of whether they were innocent or weak. She was really a silly and compassionate woman. How could such a dark person like him fall in love with such a woman? But, he loved her, Gong Dai suddenly realized. Royal sister had said that she loved him several times, but he had never said it to her face. He suddenly panicked. He was afraid that he would never have this chance again. He was really scared. "Royal sister, come out." He ran through the forest like a madman. No matter how the branches cut his clothes, how his crown fell, and how his hair was messed up, his expression became more and more panicked, and his tone became more and more fierce. "Gong Yimo, come out. How can you abandon me? You can't abandon me." Chapter 618. More and more small wounds appeared on his body, but he did not care. He had to be fast, faster. He could not let Gong Yimo leave him. Suddenly, a red figure flashed past. Gong Dai's eyes lit up as he chased after it. "Gong Yimo." His voice was hoarse, but he could not hide his surprise. "Gong Yimo, I know it's you. Come out." But she disappeared in an instant. He looked around blankly in the forest, but he could not see anything. That kind of sudden joy and sadness was really hard to accept. The veins on Gong Dai's neck were bulging. He looked around vigilantly, but there was no sign of her. Gong Dai clenched his teeth tightly. At this moment, he was also on the verge of exploding. His heart felt like it was rising in boiling water and being fried in a pan of oil. But he could not panic or get angry. He had to calm down. He had to endure. He pulled out a dagger and said coldly, "Gong Yimo, come out." His voice was trembling, but the dagger's blade was firmly pointed at his neck. He did not want to use such a method, but he had no other choice. He knew that royal sister must be nearby, and she was also rational. Although he did not know how she managed to retain her rationality, he could not find her now. He could only force her to come out. Come out. He stood in the same spot, but the dagger stabbed a little deeper. Fresh blood flowed down. He knew that he could not hide the smell from royal sister. Come out. Just as he was about to stab deeper, a red figure flashed past. He quickly chased after it, but the other party seemed to be playing hide-and-seek with him and did not show herself. Finally, he lifted the dagger again, but it was knocked away by a flying rock. He did not care about the dagger that had fallen and turned around. Indeed, he saw the back of the red figure. Gong Yimo. Stop right there. That shout seemed to have used up all his strength. He was really too scared. Just thinking about how royal sister was pregnant, and how she was in such a state of sudden lucidity and madness, made him extremely scared. That was why he called out her name at the top of his lungs. Finally, the figure paused and stopped. When Gong Dai saw that she had stopped, he was overjoyed. He tried his best to speak softly so as not to provoke her. He knew that she was still rational and could still hear him. Momo. Don't be afraid. I won't go near you. A gust of wind blew and Gong Dai could clearly smell the scent of blood. It wasn't from his body, but it was from Gong Yimo. Gong Dai turned pale with fright. He really wanted to go up and see how she was and how she got hurt, but he didn't dare. When he saw the blood on her sleeves, his heart began to beat rapidly, but he did not dare to act rashly. Momo. Did you hear that? We have a child. He's in your stomach. You said that regardless of gender, he'll be called Gong Ji. I promise you, okay? As long as you give birth to him. Gong Dai tried to use information that could move her to wake her up. She must still be rational. Otherwise, she wouldn't have run to such a deserted place and knocked away his dagger. Gong Dai was a little alarmed. Perhaps the injuries on her body were caused by herself in order to maintain her rationality. This thought made him even more alarmed. Another gust of wind blew and the trees rustled, but he couldn't hear anything. His eyes were fixed on the back of the bright red figure in front of him, and his ears were filled with the sound of his violent heartbeat. Momo, she still didn't move. Gong Dai couldn't help but carefully move forward, wanting to get closer to her. Gong Yimo's back was facing him. Her black hair was blown by the wind, and the smell of blood seemed to be even stronger. Gong Dai carefully approached her step by step, wanting to grab her so that she couldn't run anymore. Finally, the distance between them was less than 5 meters. Momo. Today is our big day. Don't leave me, okay? Gong Dai said as he covered up his actions. 4 meters. Suddenly, Gong Yimo seemed to have snapped out of her daze. She ran forward again. With her speed, Gong Dai would definitely not be able to catch up. Gong Yimo. In a moment of desperation, Gong Dai called out to her again. Strangely, she stopped again. She seemed to know who was behind her. Her blood-stained hands by her side clenched into fist. The veins on the back of her hands were bulging. Gong Dai was getting more and more flustered. There was too much panic, fear, anger and uneasiness. Gong Dai gave up on being gentle and suddenly thought of an extreme method. He did a shocking action and knelt down on one knee. He knew that even if Gong Yimo didn't turn around, she would know what he was doing from the sound of his voice. After he knelt down on one knee, he stared intently at Gong Yimo's back. Then, he slowly knelt down on both knees. At this moment, his eyes were red and his voice couldn't help but become hoarse. Gong Yimo, don't you hate me? The person who killed you is right here. Where are you going? His voice was originally calm, but later on, it became more and more restrained. He hated himself for being so powerless. The person he loved was in so much pain, yet he couldn't help her ease her pain. He was really too weak and useless. He hated this world that restricted him in every way. He hated everyone who stopped them from being together. He hated. At this moment, he knelt on the ground. He threw away all his dignity and only wanted her to turn around. He wanted to face it with her and bear it together. Perhaps in his previous life, he had never been so useless. He actually knelt down. Gong Yimo. You said that I killed you in my previous life. Gong Dai licked his dry lips. Behind his hoarse voice, there was a deep pleading. I was wrong. I admit my mistake. I'll kneel down and beg you to forgive me. You can take revenge on me for all your unhappiness. As long as you don't hurt yourself, I'll do anything. Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo was still indifferent. Finally, his eyes couldn't help but turn red. If you're angry, you can even kill me. Gong Yimo, can you turn around? Don't you want to see how I kneel down and beg for your forgiveness? Gong Dai hoped that Gong Yimo would turn around. As long as she could still understand his words, there would be a chance for her to regain her rationality. He believed in her. Therefore, he deliberately tempted her again. I'm kneeling behind you. The bastard who killed you is right here. Don't you want to take revenge on him? Momo, he said anxiously. Just when he thought that Gong Yimo was indifferent to his words, she gradually turned around. At that moment, Gong Dai had to clench his teeth to stop himself from crying. He stared at Gong Yimo's body in disbelief. His fingers dug deep into his palms. He used all his rationality to control himself and not pull the woman in front of him into his arms. She might not be able to take any more provocation. Her little face was covered in blood and there was a big hole in her chest. It wasn't just her chest. Her waist and thighs were all badly mutilated by her. In order to maintain her rationality, she didn't rush down the mountain to kill people. She could only use pain to stimulate herself. But at this moment, she didn't seem to feel pain because those wounds were so deep that her bones could be seen. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died long ago. But she didn't die and didn't jump down from the broken staircase. This meant that she was still fighting in the depths of her heart. She wanted to live, she wanted to endure the madness, so she could only hurt herself. Chapter 619. When she saw that Gong Dai was really kneeling on the ground, 2 streams of blood tears flowed from her eyes that were supposed to be lifeless. She could not speak. Her pair of ferocious eyes stared quietly at Gong Dai. Her blood tears flowed and disappeared into the depths of the grass. She was like a puppet that was being controlled. Under the violent outer shell, she struggled and roared in her heart. Every time her body and mind clashed, it was the price to pay. A bloody mess was unavoidable. When Gong Dai saw her tears of blood, he felt his heart clench in pain. Only now did he know how much his royal sister had suffered alone. He knelt a few steps forward and carefully approached her. Momo, it's all right. One of her shoes had fallen off, and her stocking had fallen off as well. Her feet, which were originally white like jade, were now cold and scarred. Stepping on the withered grass, he reached out with a trembling hand to touch her feet. Her small toes suddenly curled up, as if resisting his closeness. Gong Dai pretended not to notice. He lowered his head and carefully examined her feet. He realized that most of the wounds were caused by stones and grass. It made his heart ache for no reason. Momo, you still remember me, right? Gong Ju raised his head and reached out to touch her clothes. He didn't dare to make too big of a movement, but he approached her little by little. Gong Yimo seemed to be dead, leaving only an empty shell behind. But the tears from her unfocused eyes fell on the back of Gong Ju's hand, leaving a burn mark. Gong Ju finally couldn't bear it and hugged her tightly. At that moment, he seemed to understand why she was crying. It was really difficult to be together. She was in pain, tired and aggrieved. This knowledge made his heart ache. At this moment, he was still kneeling and could only hug her waist. Even though it was not easy for him to hug her, he did not dare to use any strength. Her body was covered in injuries. If he used any strength, it would be a second injury. He hugged her gently for a while and carefully reached out to touch her lower abdomen. You also know that you're pregnant, right? Gong Dai raised his head and asked softly. Gong Yimo could not give him an answer. She stood there like a stone statue. Her chest heaved up and down violently, as if a ferocious beast was about to break free. Her face and eyes were extremely ferocious. But the tears that kept falling proved that she was still rational. She could hear what he was saying. You're also afraid of hurting the child, right? He's fine. Gong Dai tried his best to coax her. He did not get an answer, but he was not angry. His face was stained with Gong Yimo's cold blood, but he did not feel it. He raised his head and slowly got up, reaching out to wipe her tears. She was quiet. When she wiped away her tears, he stood up as well. Because Gong Dai was a head taller than Gong Yimo, he lowered his head and gently hugged her in his arms. She could hear his strong and heavy heartbeat. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," he apologized sincerely. "No matter what you've experienced, I won't ask. No matter what secrets you have, I don't want to know. Don't be sad, baby. It's okay." Gong Dai desperately wanted to help her, but he had no choice. He could only think of knocking her out. So he did his best to coax her gently and divert her attention. "Momo, can you relax a little?" He felt that Gong Yimo's body was too tense. The slightest touch would break her. Her state was sometimes calm and sometimes crazy. He was really afraid of agitating her. He did not know how long she could hold it in. When she went crazy, would she hurt herself again? So he told her to relax again and again. "Moa, I didn't expect us to have a child so soon. Do you think he'll be like you or me?" Gong Dai muttered to himself as his hand gently moved behind her neck. "I hope it's a son. How good would it be to let him protect you with me?" At this moment, Gong Yimo was no longer crying. She stared at Gong Dai's shoulder with unfocused eyes. However, her body showed that she was fighting against the Gu poison every minute and every second. So her expression became more and more ferocious, and her small hands clenched tighter and tighter. Gong Dai's voice gradually choked. He gently pressed his forehead against Gong Yimo's and told her softly, "Momo, I'm sorry. I didn't take good care of you." The moment he said this, he raised the knife in his hand and slashed at Gong Yimo's neck. However, something unexpected happened. Before he could slash at Gong Yimo's neck, her eyes suddenly widened. She bit down hard on Gong Dai's collarbone. She bit down hard. It was as if she wanted to tear him apart. Gong Dai's attack also missed because of her bite. It seemed to have no effect on her body. Gong Dai was shocked. He ignored her biting him and slashed at the back of her neck again. This time, she grabbed his hand. There was no longer any humanity in her scarlet eyes. There was only bloodthirsty. She growled like a wild beast, then grabbed Gong Dai's neck and pressed him against a tree. She opened her mouth and bit down on Gong Dai's body again. He was in so much pain that he sucked in a breath of cold air. He wanted to resist, but he realized that he was powerless. After the bite, her mouth was filled with blood. The corners of her mouth curled up and she finally revealed a bloodthirsty smile. She raised her head and stared at the prey in her hand. She gradually tightened her grip. This time, Gong Dai immediately felt suffocated. Gong Yimo did not hold back. She really wanted to kill him. Gong Dai grabbed her hands and resisted with all his might. However, after Gong Yimo went berserk, her strength was astonishing. The veins on Gong Dai's forehead popped out. Would he die here? Royal sister, she really wanted to kill him. Moa. Suddenly, Gong Che's urgent voice sounded. Gong Yimo fiercely turned around. Her beast-like gaze caused a group of guards to surround Gong Che. Lo Chi and the rest had been searching for a long time. They finally heard the sound and came here. They did not expect to see such a scene. Let go of the prince. They all pulled out their swords, but it was useless. If Gong Yimo wanted to attack, none of them would be a match for her. More and more people came. For some reason, Gong Yimo suddenly let go of Gong Dai, who was about to die. She gave the crowd a fierce look, then turned around and ran up the mountain. Cough cough. Cough cough. Royal sister. Gong Dai held his neck and gasped for air. He could feel that at the most critical moment, Royal sister let him go. She still recognized him, even if she was in a state of insanity. Gong Yimo ran away. Seeing Gong Dai struggle to stand up and want to chase after her, Gong Che could not help but pull him back. Don't go. She doesn't recognize you anymore. Can't you see that she's about to strangle you to death? Gong Che did not want Gong Dai to die in Moa's hands. When Moa woke up, she would be in so much pain that she would want to die. However, Gong Dai shook off his hand. She remembers me. His eyes were bloodshot from the lack of oxygen, but he kept staring in the direction of the mountain. I have to stop her. She's going to do something stupid. Chapter 620. Gong Che could not persuade him and could only let go. Gong Dai moved quickly, and the rest of the people were not slow either. They ran towards the altar at the end of the stairway. That was the place where the founding empress had jumped to her death. It was also the most sacred place in Daiyu State. Before they got close, Gong Che heard the sounds of an intense battle. It was Moa and Gong Dai. Near the altar, two red figures were fighting. Their movements were too fast, and outsiders could only see after images. Gong Che watched the two of them fight and did not dare to approach. The rest of the people could not help even if they wanted to. They could only watch anxiously from the side. As Gong Yimo had lost her rationality, Gong Dai could only try his best to not be killed by her. Perhaps she would wake up when she was completely drained of her strength. With this thought in mind, Gong Dai endured the pain in his heart and began to attack fiercely. It was unknown if his potential had been stimulated at the critical moment, but Gong Dai was actually able to hold Gong Yimo back without falling into a disadvantageous position. Gong Che could not help, so he could only shout Gong Yimo's name from the side. Moa, wake up. He is Gong Dai. Gong Yimo was indifferent. Under the suppression of the Jiu poison, she was sometimes clear-headed and sometimes confused. But now, she had lost her rationality. Gong Dai wanted to hold her back and exhaust her strength, but Gong Dai could not do it alone. Gong Yimo's moves were getting more and more powerful, and Gong Dai's injuries were increasing. Everyone could only see the crazy side of Gong Yimo, but they did not know what kind of torment she was enduring inside. Gong Yimo felt like she was trapped in a cage surrounded by red curtains. She could see everything that was happening around her clearly, but most of the time, she could not control her body. She was like an inexhaustible beast. She could not lose her rationality. She was afraid that if she completely lost her rationality, she would not be able to resist rushing down the mountain to kill someone, or kill Gong Dai who was looking for her. She did not want to die. She did not know why she was struggling at death's door. She only silently told herself to endure it. Perhaps if she could endure it, she would not die. If she didn't die, would she still have a chance to marry Gong Ju? She did not want to die, but when she saw Gong Dai stabbing at her with a dagger, she could not hold it in anymore. She knocked away his dagger and exposed herself. She wanted to leave. She could not stay in front of him for too long. She was afraid that she would break his neck in the next second, but when she heard him scream her name, she could not stop. She couldn't help but stop. Even though she desperately wanted to leave, she couldn't. Her body and heart longed for him. The more pain she felt, the more she wanted to stay by his side. She wanted him to coax her gently and hold her in his arms. But no, he would kill her. So she did not turn back. She was afraid that if she did, she would not be able to leave. But she heard him urging her to stay, his voice heavy and lingering. He said that they had a child, but she did not believe him. He must be lying to her, he was so cunning. Then, such a proud person like him begged her softly behind her, begging her not to leave and to face it together. At that moment, her heart felt like it was being squeezed by something. It hurt so much that she could not breathe. He carefully approached her, but she told herself to leave. The first generation was out of control. Were you going to kill your lover with your own hands? He was still approaching her. He wanted to help her so much. He wanted to face it with her so much. He did not want to give up on her. He seemed to have forgotten how dangerous she was at this moment. She could not wait any longer. Gong Yimo gritted her teeth. She could feel the killing intent in her body getting more and more uncontrollable. She had to leave immediately, but he called out to her again. He even knelt down in front of her. Even though he did not turn back, Gong Yimo could feel his every move. He thought that she still hated him for what he had done in her past life, so he knelt down to apologize. He used a very humble and lowly method to provoke her and ask her to turn back. He said that he had killed her in her past life. So now, he was kneeling in front of her. She could vent all her unhappiness on him. As long as she did not leave, as long as she turned back, all her pain, resentment, and unwillingness, even if it had nothing to do with him in this life, he was still willing to admit his mistake. Because his love for her was enough to make him put down all his dignity. He was clearly such a strong person. At that moment, she turned back because she wanted to tell him crazily, "I don't blame you anymore. I don't blame you anymore. I don't blame or hate you for what happened in my past life. Can you get up?" You're making my heart ache. But she could not say a single word. Countless emotions surged and blocked her throat. She was anxious and in pain. In the end, it turned into tears of blood. When she turned around, she saw that his face had the same expression of heartache. His eyes were red. He was angry because of her injuries, unwillingness, pain. At that moment, she thought she was dead. This was the man she loved deeply. How could she make him feel so bad? She might as well not persist and just die. But unfortunately, after persisting for so long, she still could not become his bride. Momo, I know you're rational. Can you wake up? Gongju saw Gong Yimo's ferocious expression. Her eyes were either black or red. Her black hair fluttered in the wind, and her red dress was as red as blood. It was as if the whole world was dyed red. Every move she made was a killing move. Every step she took, she had a kind of beauty that made one's heart tremble. At this moment, Gong Dai's body was covered with injuries. In some places, his bones could be seen, but he did not give up. He could not give up on her. If even he gave up on her, then she would be alone again. The more the two of them fought, the closer they got to the altar. Gong Dai became more and more afraid. This staircase was so deep that he could not see the bottom. The closer they got, the cold wind whistled from the bottom of the cliff. Gong Yimo's iron chain ruthlessly lashed out at Gong Dai's chest. His chest instantly split open and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He was no match for the crazy Gong Yimo. Now, he could only grit his teeth and endure. Your Highness. Lo Chi and the rest panicked. Gong Yimo and Gong Dai's martial arts were not on the same level as theirs. Especially when the two of them were going all out, they could not interfere at all. No. It was not that they could not interfere. The guards behind them all had cold bows on their backs. If the situation really went out of control, they could still kill Gong Yimo on the spot. When Gong Dai was hit again, Gong Che could not watch any longer. Gong Dai, come here. If you continue like this, you will die. Chapter 621. Gong Dai acted as though he did not hear anything. He could not leave. If he left, what would happen to Royal Sister? Gong Che had no other choice. He ordered his men to raise their bows and aim at Gong Yimo. This was a very risky move because the two of them were moving too fast. Even if the arrows were aimed, no one knew what would happen in the end. However, Gong Che had no other choice. He had to help Gong Dai delay Moa. If this continued, Moa would definitely kill Gong Dai. Release the arrows. 10 arrows flew towards Gong Yimo from different directions. At that moment, she did not dodge. Instead, she gave Gong Dai a hard slap, causing him to stagger back a few steps. His face instantly turned pale. Gong Che was right. If this continued, Gong Dai would definitely die in her hand. Stop it. An arrow pierced her chest, but it only caused her to pause for a moment. She continued to attack Gong Dai without stopping at all. She attacked him tirelessly, fast and ruthlessly. The feeling of flesh and blood bursting open was the only way to fully express the anger in her body. The more blood she saw, the harder it was to control. Stop it. Tears of blood flowed down again, but she could not stop. Every time Gong Dai vomited blood, she felt like she was going to vomit blood too. Her chest was very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Seeing her cry, Gong Dai's eyes turned red. At this moment, he was in a sorry state. There were wounds of all sizes. It could be said that he had suffered more than all the wounds he had suffered in his life. However, seeing Gong Yimo cry made his heart ache even more. It's okay. His blood-stained lips trembled slightly. His dark jade-like eyes looked at her quietly. I don't blame you. However, in the next second, Gong Yimo's fingers left deep scratches on his body. Another arrow pierced her shoulder. At that moment, her face was contorted due to the pain. Stop it. She suddenly raised her head and screamed. The struggle and pain in that scream were so obvious. She was on the verge of being torn apart by the two emotions of controlling and venting. Her face was covered in blood. At that moment, she finally fell into an even more terrifying madness. Unbeknownst to her, they had already reached the altar. Gong Dai's stubborn resistance and occasional sneak attacks made her go crazy like a trapped beast. At this moment, Gong Yimo roared again. At that moment, her strength seemed to have reached its peak at a speed visible to the naked eye. She pushed Gong Dai back with a palm strike and clenched her fists tightly. At this moment, a section of the iron chain on her wrist was turned into iron powder by the inner strength that overflowed from her body. Specks of silver-white powder dissipated in the cold wind at the edge of the cliff and disappeared into her fluttering long hair. It was as if she was using her life to prepare for the final attack. But at this moment, Gong Dai was powerless to resist. He had a premonition that in the next second, he would die in the hands of the royal sister. Could it be that this was fate? A dagger suddenly appeared in Gong Yimo's hand. After a few moves, she pinned Gong Dai to the ground. She raised the dagger in her hand high and with a thunderous momentum, she stabbed it towards his chest. This time, he was definitely going to die. At the moment of death, Gong Dai's eyes were surprisingly calm. His eyes were filled with her reflection, but it was not her crazy appearance, but her sober appearance. She was quick-witted and sweet, with a smile that gathered all the beauty in the world. Stop it. Pu, the blade ruthlessly pierced into his flesh. Hot blood splashed onto Gong Dai's face. He opened his eyes in a daze, and then his eyes widened in an instant. Royal sister, Moa. Gong Che hurriedly ran towards them. When Gong Yimo attacked, Gong Che thought that Gong Dai was definitely going to die. Because under such a murderous situation, Moa would not be able to control herself. But at the last moment, Gong Yimo pressed Gong Dai under her body, and when the dagger was about to pierce Gong Dai's chest, it made a sharp turn. The blade quickly cut through Gong Dai's chest, and finally entered her own body. At that moment, the world fell silent. The pain gave Gong Yimo a moment of rationality. At this moment, her messy black hair was stuck to her face, and her pair of ferocious black and red eyes revealed a trace of purity. She gasped for breath, kneeling on Gong Dai's body, and spoke in a hoarse voice. I have long stopped blaming you. From the day she fell in love with him, she had already decided to marry him. What else was there to blame? Her hoarse voice continued. She looked at him in a daze, as if she wanted to imprint his appearance in the depths of her soul. I love you. After saying that, her expression turned ferocious again. She pulled out the dagger from her body, and without caring about the blood flowing out, she directly cut through the meridians in both of Gong Dai's legs. Then, she resolutely ran towards the cliff. She ran so fast that her fluttering red dress was like a flying red cloud, gathering all the gorgeous colors on the cold cliffs of the mountain peak. She resolutely jumped off the cliff, but at the last moment, someone hugged her and fell with her. If it wasn't for Gong Dai, his meridians would have been cut by her and he wouldn't be able to get up. The biting cold wind from the mountain stream seemed to have brought her back a little. She heard many people shouting from the top of the cliff, Your Majesty, Gong Che. She tried hard to turn around to look at him, but she was tightly hugged from behind by Gong Che. Her face was facing the sky, and her back was facing the cliff. Moa, his voice was blown away by the wind, and he wasn't sure if she could hear him in this rapid fall. Don't be afraid. Gong Dai's bright yellow robe fluttered upwards, lifting up her blood-red dress. The same gorgeous colors were like fireworks. Before they dissipated, they collided into each other, creating an extreme beauty. This time, I'll protect you. He tightly hugged Gong Yimo. His mind couldn't help but recall the words she had said when they were building the canal. Because they had to blow up the rocks and cut off the water flow, forcing it to change its course, Gong Yimo had to walk alone on the mountain peak, looking for a suitable angle to blow up the rocks. Gong Che was worried and wanted to help her find the gap, but she refused. Crown Prince Gidge, this place is too high, what if I fall? You can just go over there and wait for me. Gong Che looked at the deep water below and said disapprovingly, There's water below, you won't die even if you fall. And because he was building the canal, he had trained himself to be a good swimmer. Gong Yimo smiled and told him, That's where you're wrong. She walked over and looked down with Gong Che. The position was too high, and the water below was as beautiful as a mirror. The gentle wind caused the short hair on her head to curl up cutely. She spoke as if she was telling the truth. Falling from such a high place, with the addition of gravity and speed, Even if there's water below, the moment you touch the water, it will be as painful as landing on the ground. You'll die. Seeing that Gong Che didn't seem to understand, she giggled. In short, if you accidentally fall into the water in the future, it's best to adjust your body in time and use your back to touch the water to reduce the damage. The rest will depend on your luck. Chapter 622. Under the warm sunlight, she spoke seriously about this common knowledge. Gong Che only felt the soft hair on the top of her head fluttering in the wind, all the way to the tip of his heart. The cold wind was painful. He was now hugging Moa from behind with his back facing the bottom. The stairway to heaven was the source of the soaring dragon river and also the holy land of Dai Yu State. At that moment, he prayed in his heart. If there really was a god, be it the founding empress who jumped off the cliff or the immortals who ascended to heaven, no matter who it was, please listen to his sobs and protect the woman in his arms. He hugged Gong Yimo tightly. Many images of her flashed through his mind. She smiled and forced him to eat desserts. She was drunk and silly. In order to save him, she blew up the dragon boat and faked her death to escape. At that time, he thought that if she really died, he might not live for long. At the last moment, when they were falling rapidly, Gong Yimo's vision was blurry. However, she heard a regretful voice telling her, "I'm sorry, I really can't be your brother, but I'm very happy to be able to protect you once." That voice paused. There were salty water droplets dripping from below onto her neck. That voice choked up. Zhu Zhuang dreamed of a butterfly, a lifetime of big dreams. I really hope that this world is also a dream. When I wake up again, I can return to the time when you were my wife. I won't let you down again. Moa. Bang. The moment the heavy object fell into the water, Gong Yimo's head was tightly protected in Gong Che's arms. However, her head was still dizzy and her ears were ringing. At that moment, she clearly heard the sound of something shattering. That was Gong Che's spine. At this height, he couldn't help but be crushed by the water surface. He would definitely die. Her heart ached and she almost couldn't breathe. The turbulent water drowned her. She completely lost her mind. She didn't know if she had fainted or gone crazy. It didn't matter. Under the cliff, who could be hurt? She was so tired and in so much pain. Suddenly, she didn't want to wake up. Momo. Royal sister. After Gong Dai regained his senses, he opened his eyes wide and struggled to crawl towards the edge of the cliff. Because Gong Yimo was afraid that he would do something stupid, she cut off the meridians in his legs. He couldn't stand up, so he could only crawl over. Everyone panicked. What should they do? The princess jumped off the cliff, the emperor also jumped off the cliff, and the prince. Everyone's eyes were red as they looked at Gong Ju, but they didn't dare to step forward. A deep sadness shrouded the altar. They knew in their hearts that no one could help Gong Ju at this time. No one could intervene. Luo Qi and the others knelt beside Gong Ju. They wanted to stop him, but they didn't dare. He was an iron-blooded man, but at this moment, he couldn't help but choke with tears. They all knew that falling into the water from a high altitude would be fatal. The height of the sky stairway, the protruding giant steps, and the surging dragon river made them all clear in their hearts that unless the gods were present, the princess and his majesty were definitely dead. Gong Dai turned a deaf ear to them and continued to crawl towards the edge. Finally, he reached the edge of the cliff. His cold face seemed to be in a daze as he looked down. Actually, he couldn't see anything. Because it was too high, the bottom was foggy. At this height, there was no doubt that they would die. For some reason, Gong Dai wanted to laugh. But when he opened his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Gong Dai's body had so many injuries. If he spat out another mouthful of blood, even the gods wouldn't be able to save him. Lo Qi and the rest were anxious. His majesty was dead. The prince was the only pillar of support for the entire Dai Yu state. He couldn't fall. If he died, he would die. If he died, the entire Dai Yu state would be plunged into chaos. Prince, you have to take care. Maybe the princess isn't dead. His voice was very soft. Even he didn't believe it. Gong Dai spat out another mouthful of blood. His bridal robe was riddled with holes and was dyed dark red. His face was getting paler and paler. It was so pale that it was shocking. Royal sister. His eyes were unfocused as he stared at a spot. His fingers dug deep into the soil beneath him. He was wrong. He was wrong. Gong Dai wanted to laugh. He really wanted to laugh. His thin lips were dyed a gorgeous color with blood. He finally laughed. But it was a sinister and twisted smile. It was as if it could swallow everything. He shouldn't have done so many stupid things. He shouldn't have let her do as she wished again and again. If he had rebelled from the start, who would dare to go against his wishes when he was in power? If he didn't care so much about the royal sister's thoughts and didn't listen to her arrangements, he wouldn't have lost her. He should have tied her up and locked her up. He shouldn't have allowed her to do anything that he didn't want to do. He should have forcefully plundered her and not blindly tolerated. He should have blindly tolerated. Tolerated. He thought that it would bring him what he wanted. It would bring him the woman he loved. Finally, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. This wasn't his nature. Gong Dai's eyes gradually turned red. That kind of red was similar to when Gong Yimo's poison acted up. There was only red and black in his eyes. There was no white. His nature. He should have killed all those who disobeyed him. Gong Che coveted the royal sister. Kill him. Gong Cheng stopped him from being with the royal sister. Overturn it. The world didn't allow them to be together. He wanted to be the most supreme person. He wanted all those who opposed him to die and completely shut their mouths. This was his nature. Tolerating, accommodating, understanding, and tolerating. What did that bring him? Gong Dai raised his head and laughed loudly. He was controlled by others time and time again. He endured time and time again. He thought that tolerating her and respecting her decisions meant that he loved her and could have her. In the end, nothing happened. She died. She died in front of him with their child. He was still powerless. Why was he powerless? He had money. He had power. He had people. He had power. Why did he fall into such a state of powerlessness? If he had killed all the hidden dangers and tied her to his side, wouldn't everything be fine? Sure enough, he was wrong. He realized it too late. He hated. This world really disgusted him. It had completely toyed with him. It deliberately forced him to suppress his nature and deceived him into having hope. Then, when he had everything, it ruthlessly took it away. It was so evil. Such a world, he really wanted to be completely destroyed. Lo Chi saw that Gong Dai was unusually silent. He didn't dare to speak for fear of provoking him. But suddenly, there was an invisible pressure pressing on him. Gong Dai's black hair flew. He knelt on the ground at the edge of the cliff and suddenly raised his head. Even with his eyes closed, everyone could feel the terrible change in Gong Dai's body. There seemed to be some kind of power rising strangely. Gong Dai's robe fluttered. His whole person was like an immortal in the sky. But the terrible pressure on his body wasn't so good. The invisible inner strength rolled up all the stones around him and turned them into powder. Then, it blended into the terrible storm and formed a terrible hurricane. The hurricane rose with Gong Dai as the center, as if it wanted to tear everything apart. Chapter 623. Gong Dai gradually stood up. No, it would be more accurate to say that Gong Dai was floating in the air. Lo Chi finally understood where this power came from. His Highness had broken through, but at this time, Gong Dai stood up. His toes were on the ground and his body seemed to be lifted by the wind as he slowly opened his eyes. At this time, the blood in his eyes had completely disappeared, but his black eyes did not have any light at all. The world was silent and his red clothes were like blood. He was like a crazy demon as he stood up with a vicious aura that soared into the sky. He was wrong. This world was indeed as twisted and dark as he had imagined. It had snatched away everything he wanted the most. It had taken away everything he had painstakingly planned for all these years. He hated this world and hated everyone. If they all died, it would be good. Then no one would come to steal his Momo. The pressure was still rising and everyone was being forced back by the blade like internal energy. Xiao Qi anxiously said, "This is bad. I'm afraid His Highness has gone mad. As soon as his voice fell, he saw Gong Dai suddenly raise his head and roar. That voice was clearly sharp enough to make people's hearts tremble, but everyone present knew that this was just a wild beast that had lost its only love. It was just a final question before falling into madness. Questioning the world. Why was it playing with people like this? The world was despicable. Forcing people to go mad. The roar spread through the mountain and countless birds and beasts were startled. They either flew up or lay on the ground. That invisible killing intent reverberated through the world, as if it was announcing that a person's consciousness had been erased and he had completely turned into a demon. Everyone was shocked. Finally, they saw Gong Dai's flying black hair turn white bit by bit. At first it was just a few strands, but in the wind, his flying hair turned completely white. There were strands of silver ash mixed within, and as they danced about, the ends of the hair leapt about in the wind, giving off a type of bewitching beauty. Could a person really be completely destroyed because their heart died? If they didn't believe it before, but in this moment, they had no choice but to believe it. A true demon had appeared in front of them. If they didn't stop it, the world would fall into chaos. Everyone's hearts sank as they became incomparably serious. Power. The feeling of being filled with power was incomparably beautiful. Gong Dai could feel that the wounds on his body were healing. It was a wonderful feeling. The 7th stage. 8th stage. His body seemed to have become a bottomless pit. Endless energy was being absorbed into his body, making him feel intoxicated. That's great. Momo, just you wait. Once I destroy this disgusting world, I'll accompany you. It won't be long. You have to wait for me. The gale seemed to have reached a critical point. Finally, when the pressure appeared, Lo Chi and the others looked at each other. Now was the time. Gong Dai was possessed by the devil. He was using a self-destructive method to force himself to advance to the next level. He was even trying to reach the legendary transformation of the 9th level. But this was also when he was at his weakest. If he didn't want him to die, now was the only time. Lo Chi suddenly attacked. He rushed towards Gong Dai, his sharp inner strength directly cutting through his flesh, but he could not stop. He strenuously walked in front of Gong Dai. Prince. His voice trembled so much that it was torn apart by the wind. Gong Dai did not respond. He stood there as if he had become one with the wind. Lo Chi gritted his teeth and reached out to chop at his neck. But in the next second, his hand was caught by Gong Dai. His pair of black and white eyes looked at him, but he no longer recognized him. Prince. At that moment, Lo Chi clearly felt that death was in front of him. If he did not say anything, he would definitely die. The princess will definitely not die. It was unknown if Gong Dai heard him, but a bone-chilling cold slowly crept up from Lo Chi's hand. Gong Dai. He was forcefully pouring his inner strength into Lo Chi's body. Ah! Ah 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 ah. The tearing pain suddenly attacked. Lo Chi was a strong man, but at this moment, he could not help but scream like crazy. His meridians simply couldn't withstand the surge of inner strength. The feeling of his meridians being torn apart was even more painful than death by 1,000 cut. He could not bear it and screamed out, but his screams made Gong Dai happy. His eyes quietly watched Lo Chi's ferocious appearance, his pitiful screams, and his weak struggles. Gong Dai finally confirmed that this was his true nature, this was the way he liked it. He deliberately pushed his inner strength into his body, slowly torturing his nerves, slowly torturing his opponent like he was toying with him. First, he would cripple his 2 hands, then his 2 legs. Watching him go from screaming to begging for mercy, to turning into a pile of mush, that kind of feeling would be wonderful. He would be careful, he would not let him die so easily. Lo Chi found that struggling was useless. It was clearly the most crucial moment for him to break through to the 9th layer, but his prince was still so strong. While breaking through, he was also distracted by teasing him, torturing him to death. This kind of reckless action proved that he did not put death in his eyes. Everything was like a joke. Cold sweat dripped down 1 drop at a time. Lo Chi's legs went soft and he knelt in front of Gong Dai. His right hand was completely crippled, but the inner strength immediately wrapped around his left hand. A kind of fear filled his heart. He could not die like this. Like a flash of light, Lo Chi suddenly raised his head and said in a strange tone, "Prince. Your Highness, you are so scary. Princess, I'm afraid she will not like you anymore." This sentence was really useful. It actually made Gong Dai withdraw his hand as if he had been electrocuted. At the same time, his expanding strength suddenly became chaotic, because his heart was in chaos. Why did she not like him? She just said that she liked him. Gong Dai panicked. His brain immediately came back to his senses. His mind could not help but think of what Gong Yimo had said to him before. She was kneeling on top of him, covered in blood. At that moment, she was actually able to overcome the poison and send the dagger that should have killed him into his body. Her blood was so hot, so painful. She said, "I don't blame you anymore, I love you, Momo." Royal sister? Gong Dai suddenly looked around blankly. The inner strength in his body became more and more chaotic. If this continued, his body would explode and he would die. Where was she? Didn't she say that she loved him? Why did she disappear? Gong Dai suddenly saw his white hair. He touched his face and his face became more and more flustered. Was it because he was too scary right now that he scared her? That's right, Momo looked brave, but she was actually the most timid. Was she so scared that she hid? Don't be afraid, even if he died, he would not hurt her, but she could not like him. Absolutely, no. Allow. His strength collapse. Gong Dai's body seemed to swell up, making an explosive sound. He was in so much pain, his body was about to split open. Now is the time. Taking advantage of the moment when Gong Dai completely turned around and his inner strength was the most chaotic, Lo Chi suddenly burst out. Using his other good hand, he ruthlessly smashed Gong Dai's neck. The violent wind suddenly reached a critical point and disappeared in an instant. It was as if some kind of connection had suddenly been cut off. Everything that happened before was an illusion. Gong Dai finally fainted. He escaped the fate of exploding and fell into endless darkness. Lo Chi endured the pain and caught him. He heaved a sigh of relief. Although he escaped death, the prince's hair would not be able to change back. Chapter 624. The water was very cold and soft. The sun was very warm. Floating up and down, she seemed to have come to a place very far away. Her head hurt. She wanted to keep sleeping like this and never wake up again. Qiu Xingfeng, dressed in white, was drinking water by the water. He was supposed to be clean, but now he was frowning, as if there was a problem troubling him. For example, why did Master leave and chase himself out of the mountain? And that strange Xue Qianzhong, could his words be trusted? Why did Master always give in to him just because he was Master's wife's nephew? Why did he trust him? After saying so much, he had always avoided thinking about one person. That person called Gong Yimo. Qiu Xingfeng frowned even more. That person, they didn't have much contact, but every time he met her, his life would become very scary. Every bad thing was related to her, but he didn't know why. He didn't hate her. It was really puzzling. Qiu Xingfeng sighed. The water was clear. His frowning appearance was reflected in it, and there was an indescribable innocence. After Master left, he found that his senior and junior brothers had changed. They became even less fond of him. Master gave him the position of sect leader, but he didn't know anything. He wanted to be obedient and wait for Master to come back, but his senior and junior brothers were more and more ostracizing him. He had no choice but to leave Mount Yunding. But after leaving Mount Yunding, he didn't know what to do or where to go. In the end, he decided to come to the capital to find Master. But when he arrived, he was in a dilemma because Master went to find Prince Qi. Prince Qi was Gong Yimo's brother. If he went to find Master, wouldn't he see Gong Yimo again? Qiu Xingfeng curled his lips. After his brain figured this out, he had been wandering around the capital. When he was hungry, he ate wild fruits. When he was thirsty, he drank water by the river. Usually, he practiced in the forest. He would just wait for Master outside the city. Suddenly, he smelled blood in the water. He raised his head and saw a bright red color floating on the water. He was shocked and quickly jumped into the water to save her. The process of saving her went smoothly. In the water, he forgot to check if she was dead or alive. After dragging her to the shore, he took a breather and lowered his head to listen to the woman's heartbeat. In Qiu Xingfeng's eyes, the concept of keeping a distance between men and women was not important, so he didn't think there was anything wrong with this. After listening for a while, he finally heard the faint heartbeat of the other party. Qiu Xingfeng heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, he raised his head and saw that the other party's face was covered by her hair. He subconsciously reached out his hand and pushed it aside. When he saw her appearance, he was shocked. He fell backwards and sat on the ground. Terrifying. Why did the person he didn't want to see the most suddenly appear before him? He wanted to turn around and leave, but when he saw Gong Yimo lying there covered in injuries, he couldn't bear to leave. There must be someone in the capital who wanted to harm her. Moreover, she was a princess, so the person who could harm her must be someone even more powerful than a princess. If she was allowed to stay here, she would definitely be caught by bad people and killed. Qiu Xingfeng bit his light-colored lips and hesitated for a while. This woman was a scourge. She killed his disciple and injured his master. He should have hated her and said some very serious words to her last time. But now, he really couldn't leave her alone. After hesitating for a long time, he finally carried her and went deep into the forest. Since someone wanted to kill her, he would hide her. As for whether she lived or died, he didn't care. All the imperial doctors gathered at Qi Manor. They didn't dare to breathe too loudly. They took turns to check his pulse and frowned. Speaking of which, the prince's body was fine. At most, he was a little weak in qi and blood. Because of his special cultivation method, his injuries were almost healed after his advancement. However, he still hadn't woken up, which made everyone very anxious. Other than the imperial doctors, the court officials were also present. It was supposed to be a joyous day. They all came to drink the wedding wine happily. They didn't expect that before they could drink the wine, they would be shocked one after another. It was hard to believe. The Empress's eyes were red and swollen. She was preparing for the national funeral in the palace, but in the end, she received such bad news. After listening to Gong Chei's guard report on the situation, she fainted from excessive grief before she could catch her breath. After she woke up, she immediately sent people to look for her son. But the road to the cross-heaven stairway had been cordoned off. Even though she was the Empress, she couldn't do anything. She could only come to see Gong Dai and beg him to find her son as soon as possible. But Gong Dai didn't wake up. Waiting in front of the door, the Empress seemed to have lost her soul. She thought that her son would die with that woman. She felt that her vision was going black and she was going to cry again. What kind of sin had she committed? Her husband was dead and her son did such a thing. Now, his whereabouts were unknown. The court officials were more rational. Now, the emperor was dead and the funeral hadn't been held yet. Then, the crown prince was also dead. They didn't think that the crown prince would still be alive under such circumstances. They also didn't know that Gong Chei did this to save Gong Yimo, and not to die for love like they thought. Now that the Daiyu state had lost two pillars, only Prince Qi, Gong Dai, was left. He was capable, charismatic, rich, and powerful. To be honest, he was more suitable to be the emperor than the crown prince. But they heard that Prince Qi was also seriously injured this time. His hair was white and he still hadn't woken up. They felt a little guilty. They hoped that nothing would happen to Prince Qi. Otherwise, the Daiyu state would fall into civil strife. Although these subjects all had their own agendas and were rather fearful of King Qi, their lives were stable and prosperous. Once civil strife broke out, they would be in a precarious situation. Therefore, they all hoped that Gong Dai would wake up soon. Otherwise, some people would be ready to make a move. The atmosphere in the room was oppressive. Lo Qi's injury had been examined. His arm couldn't be saved because his meridians were all broken. He had to amputate his arm to save his life. When Lo Qi heard the result, he didn't say anything and just asked for the amputation. Little Seven was about to cry. He hated himself for not being able to see through people. He liked that Li Xiu a little. He didn't expect her to put such a fragrance on the prince's clothes. The imperial physician had said that the effect of rosemary incense was weak. But when a person's willpower was weak, they would be easily affected by it. It could be said that the prince would eventually go crazy. It was all related to the incense. Unfortunately, at that time, all of them went to chase after the princess, and the remaining people couldn't stop Qiu Zhongchan at all. Those people ran away without paying the price, just like that. How hateful. It was late at night, but no one left. Especially the empress. She stayed in Prince Qi's residence, insisting on waiting for Gong Dai to wake up. Chapter 625. Candlelight flickered in the elegant and grand bedroom. The imperial physicians were standing guard at all times. Their hearts were in their throats, and they didn't dare to relax. They had also heard about Prince Qi's forceful breakthrough. His cultivation had been forcefully interrupted, and they weren't sure what would happen when he woke up. If anything happened to Prince Qi, they would be in trouble. In just 2 days, bad news came one after another. The emperor was dead, the new emperor was dead, the princess was dead, and the only pillar of support was now in a coma. Did Dai Yu stay to fend the gods? How could such a terrible disaster befall them? Gong Dai. Gong Dai, wake up. There was the fragrance of flowers, sunlight, and her sweet and soft voice. It was a beautiful afternoon. Gong Dai opened his eyes and realized that he had shrunk. His body was bruised, and he was sweating profusely. When Gong Yimo saw that he had woken up, she first heaved a sigh of relief. Then, she spoke with disappointment. Do you think you can become a fatty in one bite? Why are you covered in injuries again? How many times have I said it? More haste, less speed. Gong Dai looked at his hands. He remembered that when he was young, the royal sister taught him martial arts. He was very eager to become stronger. Every time the royal sister gave him a task, he would complete it several times faster than the usual. Therefore, when she wasn't looking, he would often be covered in injuries. It was fine if she didn't see it, but every time she saw it, the royal sister would harshly scold him. This time, he fainted from exhaustion. This was great. The royal sister would definitely teach him a lesson. Gong Dai tugged at his clothes uneasily. He lowered his head and waited for the royal sister to scold him. However, he didn't repent. The palace was like this. If he wasn't strong enough, he would die. Every time this happened, he would be very obedient. He knew that if he did this, the royal sister would be angry, and her heart would ache for him even more. Her heart ache. Was this liking? But strangely, Gong Yimo didn't say anything. She pulled him up from the grass. You're so dirty. Come, I'll take you to bathe. The 7-year-old Gong Dai followed the 8-year-old Gong Yimo to the side of a well. Gong Dai felt a little strange. In the past, when it came to taking a bath, they would wait for Xin to boil the water and pour it into the bathtub. Why did they come to the side of the well? Gong Yimo rolled up her sleeves and fetched a bucket of water. Without saying a word, she poured it over Gong Dai's head. Gong Dai subconsciously closed his eyes. The cold well water made him shiver all over, and his little face tensed up. After the water stopped flowing, he stared at Gong Yimo with his big, clear eyes. His eyes were wet, just like a little deer, and he looked a little aggrieved. How do you feel? The other was directly twisted and finally exploded. As for Gong Dai, the ruthlessness he showed at such a young age made her afraid. She was afraid that he would eventually walk the path of loneliness and become the most cruel person among all the cruel people. Even if he was so well behaved now, he was still young and couldn't hide it from her. Sometimes, he couldn't help but take revenge on those people in the cold palace. Although he didn't hurt their lives, she knew that he was only concerned about her. He was uncontrollably turning into the other people in power in the palace. Scheming, hypocritical, ruthless, and there was no light in his life. This wasn't the child she wanted to teach. He should have a higher perspective. Gong Dai didn't understand a little, but he understood one thing, and that was that the royal sister hoped that he could be a little less ruthless, and have a little more childlike innocence and happiness that didn't belong to this palace. He sighed in his heart. The royal sister always had some strange and naive thoughts. Living in a place where the strong preyed on the weak, how could she not be twisted? Perhaps she could maintain her original appearance, because he would protect her for a lifetime. Just as he was about to say that he would be obedient in the future and be different from those people, Gong Yimo suddenly glared at him sternly. It's normal to be trapped in a cocoon, but you're my younger brother. You won't be confined to this cage in the future. You will become the strongest existence in the 4 countries. Tolerance, benevolence, and mission. You can be disdainful, but you must have them. Chapter 626. Who said that growing up in the palace means that you have to be the same? Shouldn't the real strong jump out of it and be above it? If you don't break the rules, how can you make the rules? The more Gong Yimo said, the more reasonable she felt. If you want to be like them and become a person inside the wall, I won't allow it. Gong Dai was stunned. He didn't understand what she meant by won't allow it. He wanted to be stronger than his father and become the ruler of the palace. Wasn't she satisfied with this? Break the rules and become the strongest person in the 4 countries. The goal that the royal sister set for him was so far away. Seeing the puzzled look on Gong Dai's face, Gong Yimo suddenly stuck out her tongue. She felt that she had said too much. Really, you can't eat a mouthful and become a fatty. Under her guidance, Gong Dai would definitely become a good youth who was full of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and faith. Why was she so anxious? Perhaps, she just saw that he was so cruel to himself at such a young age. During this period of time, she had seen too many dark secrets in the palace. She was a little scared. Gong Dai might not become like that. So she stepped forward and hugged him. She used her internal force to drive away the cold. She said in a relaxed tone, "Relax, I'm here. There's no place that can trap you or restrain you. The only thing you have to do is to break the cage in your heart. Break the shadow that naturally binds your heart. You're unique and the best in the world. You don't have to be afraid of anyone. You don't have to suppress yourself. You can show your true nature and live the life you want. There's no construction without destruction. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up." A voice like a call woke Gong Dai up. But he didn't open his eyes. He was thinking self-deprecatingly in the dark. The royal sister certainly didn't think that she helped him break the cage of the rules and environment. But he unknowingly fell into a cage called Gong Yimo. He was controlled by her, influenced, demanded and bound by her. She thought that he had revealed his true nature, but in fact, he hadn't. All this time, he had been happy to be trapped in her cage. However, from the moment she jumped off the cliff, this cage had been shattered. He thought with pity. If he had become her cage from the beginning, how good would it have been? She was tightly attached to him, controlled and bound by him. Then this result wouldn't have been like this. But he was lucky. Maybe God would give him a chance to correct his mistake. Gong Dai slowly opened his eyes. Before he saw his sister's body, he didn't believe that she was dead. She was his woman, how could she die? Seeing Gong Ju wake up, the imperial physician was stunned for a moment before whispering, "Your Highness is awake." Gong Dai's heaven and earth wooges, heaven and earth's heaven and earth's is heaven and earth's is heaven and earth's to be. He had a feeling that with his current strength, even if his sister went berserk, he could easily restrain her. Indeed, only with strength could one obtain everything. Many people surrounded Gong Dai's bed. The Empress was the first to be surrounded. When she came in, she wanted to question Gong Dai, but the faint pressure emitted from his body made her heart skip a beat. She couldn't help but lower her voice and plead, "Prince Chi, I beg you to save Che." She couldn't help but cry. Gong Dai's men had already gone to the bottom of the cliff. That was why they sealed off the path to the stairway to heaven. Now that the sky was dark, the people who went to search might not have reached the bottom of the cliff yet. The Empress cried as she spoke. The other officials and imperial physicians looked at each other, but they had to speak. Now that the Daiyu state is without a leader, the people are in chaos. Your Highness, please pull yourself together and preside over the situation. One of the officials stepped forward and spoke respectfully. When the Empress heard this, she was in disbelief. Are you cursing Che to die? Her face instantly contorted. Che is still alive. He must be alive. The officials lowered their heads and ignored the Empress's cries. Your Highness, please come to court tomorrow and preside over the situation. If there was no explanation for today's matter and no one to suppress it, all the evil people would come out to cause trouble again. How dare you? Are you rebelling? The Empress's face was pale as she questioned in a shrill voice. Your Highness. The officials ignored the Empress and pleaded. The situation was critical. How could a woman like her speak? Everyone was waiting for Gong Dai to express his opinion. Whether the Daiyu state would fall into chaos or not depended on Gong Dai's decision. After a long time, Gong Dai smiled gently and opened his eyes. Gong Yimo felt cold. There were countless fragments in her mind. They scattered and couldn't be pieced together. She slowly opened her eyes. Beside the fire, she saw Qiu Xingfeng. She couldn't help but blink. In an instant, the memories related to Qiu Xingfeng quickly came together, but the process was very slow. She remembered that she had transmigrated to the Cold Palace, Mount Yunding, and her master. When she spoke, she found that her voice was very hoarse. Hearing Gong Yimo's voice, Qiu Xingfeng immediately woke up from his meditation. He didn't hear what Gong Yimo said clearly. He only heard that her throat was uncomfortable and subconsciously gave her some water. After drinking the water, Gong Yimo felt much better. She felt that she had forgotten a lot of things. Although her memories with her master were slowly piecing together, many scenes were already fragmented and she couldn't remember them. Master. This time, Qiu Xingfeng heard Gong Yimo call him master. He was shocked. The bamboo tube in his hand fell to the ground. The unfinished water spilled out and sizzled when it came into contact with the fire. You called me master? He couldn't believe it and widened his eyes. Was this person trying to harm him again? She actually called him master. Thinking of this, Qiu Xingfeng was a little annoyed. As expected, he shouldn't have been so soft-hearted and stayed. He originally only wanted to hide Gong Yimo and apply some medicine. But seeing her covered in wounds, although those wounds were healing quickly, it would take at least a few months for them to fully recover. Did he want to keep a weak girl like her here? What if she met a beast? After some hesitation, he still chose to stay. He didn't expect that when she woke up, she would encounter a situation that he couldn't understand. Master. Seeing Qiu Xingfeng looking at her as if he had seen a ghost, Gong Yimo touched her face in confusion. Master, why are you in a daze? If I don't call you master, what should I call you? She wanted to get up, but her body hurt. Looking down, she saw that she was wearing Qiu Xingfeng's clothes. And under the clothes, there seemed to be countless wounds crisscrossing. Suddenly, she was surprised to find that her internal energy seemed to have disappeared. She was shocked. She sensed it carefully. As expected, her dantian was empty. She had lost all her martial arts. This situation made her want to cry. What should I do, master? I realized that I have lost all my martial arts. Qiu Xingfeng was shocked. He didn't care why she called him master and hurriedly grabbed her hand to check. Chapter 627. For those who practiced martial arts was their life. Qiu Xingfeng was not only good at martial arts, but he was also good at medicine. He frowned when he felt her pulse. It's okay. You're just hurt too badly and lost your martial arts temporarily. You'll get better in the future. His face suddenly turned red when he said this. And, you're pregnant. Although he didn't know how to get pregnant, he had read in books that this kind of pulse meant that she was pregnant. She had a baby in her belly. What? This time, Gong Yimo was even more surprised than him. She was looking at Qiu Xingfeng with a very shocked expression. Her mind was in a mess. She could only think of one possibility in this situation. Master. I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. Gong Yimo didn't know what expression to use to face Qiu Xingfeng. Anger. Grievance. Thinking of how Qiu Xingfeng didn't want her to go down the mountain, could it be because he liked her? Wait, would her master who was like a 10-year-old child, know what love was. Looking at her master's clothes, she didn't know whether to be angry or depressed. Why did she suddenly feel that she didn't know this world after waking up? Cho Xing-feng didn't understand. What did she mean by he was this kind of person? What kind of person was he? Seeing Gong Yimo stare at him angrily and then look down at her clothes, he understood and explained consciously. You mean clothes? Senior brothers and sisters seemed to have said something about male and female etiquette. Did Gong Yimo blame him for changing her clothes? Your clothes are all damaged. You can't wear them anymore. Gong Yimo suddenly looked up and stared at him. What's with the injuries on my body? Cho Xing-feng scratched his head in confusion. Gong Yimo didn't know why she was injured. Maybe you met an enemy in the capital. Gong Yimo frowned. I feel like I've forgotten a lot of things. Cho Xing-feng naturally thought, maybe it's the sequela of being hurt too badly. Your head was hit hard. Hit hard. Gong Yimo tried hard to recall. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her head. A feeling of dizziness and tinnitus appeared. Amidst the dizziness, she seemed to feel someone hugging her tightly and cushioning her. The moment the ice-cold water surrounded her, she clearly heard the sound of her spine breaking. Who was that person? Why did she feel so sad? Gong Yimo suddenly covered her head and started moaning. After a while, she even started crying. Although Cho Xing-feng really wanted to stay away from this strange and dangerous woman, he couldn't help but ask with concern. Are you all right? How can he be fine? Gong Yimo said with a sobbing tone. Her eyes were red as if she had suffered a great grievance. For some reason, Cho Xing-feng panicked. He didn't know what to do for a while before asking in a soft voice. What happened to you? Gong Yimo suddenly released her hands from her head and looked at him with a pair of big tearful eyes. You're asking me what's wrong. I should be the one asking you what's wrong. Why am I so heavily injured? Why do I not remember so many things? And you? Why did you do such a thing to me? What? Cho Xing-feng stared at her confusedly. What? Gong Yimo's face was pale. She was obviously very weak, but she stared at him angrily as if she had eaten poison. Why did you take over my body? After thinking for a while, she couldn't think of anyone else. It must be her master. You even made me pregnant with your child. Cho Xingfeng sat by the fire and couldn't understand what she meant for a long time. When he finally understood, he suddenly jumped up as if his tail was on fire. He asked in a panic, You said this child is mine. Isn't it? Gong Yimo asked back. The two of them seemed to be comparing the size of their eyes. Their eyes were filled with confusion. It was over. The confused Gong Yimo and Cho Xing-feng who didn't know how she got pregnant. This was a big mistake. After the two of them stared at each other, Gong Yimo felt that there seemed to be more to this matter. Cho Xing-feng felt that this matter was very scary. The two of them talked for a whole night. The next day, both of them had dark circles under their eyes and were depressed. Gong Yimo couldn't believe it. Except for Cho Xing-feng, she couldn't think of anyone who wouldn't be hit by her. But how could Cho Xing-feng do such a thing? Could it be that he took some medicine by mistake and became delirious? Her heart ached. What should she do? She lost her virginity to her master. Even if she met someone she liked in the future, she couldn't marry him. In ancient times, chastity was very important. Why was she so unlucky? But looking at Cho Xing-feng's innocent face and confused face, she sighed. What was the use of scolding him? They had lived together for more than 10 years. Cho Xing-feng was as innocent as the snow on Yunding Mountain. He couldn't have done it on purpose. This child. Although it was an accident, she still couldn't bear to lose it. After all, it was a life. Cho Xing-feng wasn't born stupid. This child's IQ should be fine, right? Cho Xing-feng had never been so confused. He seemed to be caught in an unsolvable riddle. He felt like he was falling into the clouds, floating up and down. Could it be that when he saved Gong Yimo, he did something that made her pregnant? Thinking of how he leaned on her chest and listened to her heartbeat, and how he saw her wounds, took off her clothes and applied medicine on her, could it be that she could get pregnant like this? Suddenly, he remembered that after they got married, they would be honest with each other. After one night, she would get pregnant. So it was really like this. It was a pity that he didn't have the consciousness of love and no one would teach him these things. Now that he suddenly had a child, he had to be responsible, right? Just like a senior brother raising a son, he had to be responsible for raising the child. He was a child himself. Suddenly, he had to raise a child. He felt stressed. Gong Yimo thought for a whole night and decided to give up. Her mind was in a mess. She felt that things might not be so simple. For example, her wounds, her missing memories, and so on. She glanced at Qiu Xingfeng uneasily. She was afraid that she had met some accident and got pregnant. Therefore, she would rather hope that this child was Qiu Xingfeng's. Although she only treated Qiu Xingfeng as a family member, it was still much better than other random people. Moreover, Qiu Xingfeng didn't refute. His thoughtful face made her accept this possibility. She sighed. If it was Qiu Xingfeng's child, then it should be his. Although she didn't know what happened, she wouldn't do anything to Qiu Xingfeng before she knew the truth. He was so innocent. Even if it was really him, he wouldn't do it on purpose. With this thought, both of them were silent. They each had their own thoughts and difficulties. In the end, it all became a puzzle in their minds. I must recover my memories and martial arts as soon as possible. If it wasn't an accident, if it wasn't her master, but some other monster, she would teach them a lesson. Qiu Xingfeng was much simpler. He suddenly felt guilty and didn't dare to wait for his master here. He better not appear in Daiyu state. If Prince Qi knew that he caused his sister's pregnancy, he would definitely, thinking of the terrible consequences, Qiu Xingfeng decided to go to another country. Daiyu state was too scary. Chapter 628. A Golden Millet Dream, a Lifetime in a Dream. Gong Che felt that he had two dreams. One was what Moa said. He doubted her, made her a figurehead, and betrayed her in her previous life. Many scenes flashed by, but they were not complete. Some were beautiful, but most of them were not. The other was in the future. He protected her, loved her, and was willing to give up everything for her, but she did not believe him. What a pity. He missed her in both lives. He couldn't be her brother, but he still loved her. He wanted to be with her, to kiss her, to hug her, to hear her softly call him brother crown prince, to look at her lively eyes, to feel her never-ending vitality. So in the end, he died for her. The moment his back touched the water, he felt as if he had been slapped hard on the ground. He felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken, and he could clearly hear the sound of his spine breaking. But he believed that Moa would not die. She must not die. So, to be able to protect her once, he would gladly do it. Mother, please forgive your willful son. But I really can't watch Moa die without doing anything. Moa sighed in her heart. As long as he could fight for her, he would die without regrets. Your Highness. Your Highness. A worried and shrill voice nagged at him over and over again. Gong Che frowned. Could it be that he was not dead yet? Then he smiled bitterly. So what if he was not dead? Even if he was not dead, he would be crippled, right? But no. In a daze, he moved his fingers and opened his eyes with great effort. He observed his surroundings in a daze. The Eastern Palace? Why was it so dilapidated? Although it was covered with the word happiness, the feeling of decay could not be concealed. The desk, the chair, and he looked at the ordinary wine in his hand. His mind was a little muddled. Before the age of 14, his mother was not favored, but he was still the crown prince. His father had never mistreated him. After the age of 14, he encountered the greatest crisis of his life. His mother entered a temple to cultivate, his grandfather died tragically, and his position as the crown prince was unstable. However, he had Moa, so he easily overcame the crisis and welcomed a new life. After the construction of the Grand Canal, his life had been smooth sailing. He was well versed in every aspect of life. He had never seen such a dilapidated Eastern Palace before. Where was he? Was this really the Eastern Palace? Your Highness. The voice was calling him again. You're drunk. The voice sounded a little troubled. Tomorrow is the big day. Even if you're not happy, You don't have to torture yourself like this. How annoying. Why is this person so naggy? His head hurt. Could he not see it? Why didn't they call for the imperial physician? Gong Che tried hard to see who was so bold, but it was like a mirror in front of him. He only saw a short man with a heavy head, so he could not see his face clearly. This servant knows that you're feeling wronged. Sigh. Those noble ladies have too much power. Although your highness is the crown prince, you passed away one after another, and the Liu family fell. It's normal that they are unwilling to marry you. However, this servant believes that your highness is a dragon among men. You will definitely prosper in the future. When the time comes, they will regret it. The round-faced old eunuch thought of something and said, Miss Shang is a good lady. Although she came from the Jianghu, your highness, you have seen that she is resourceful and has many unexpected ideas. Not to mention, she admires you wholeheartedly. This servant believes that she can assist you and is someone who can share your trials and tribulations. You, even if you are unwilling, don't show it. Don't do things like drinking like today again. He spoke earnestly, but Gong Che was getting more and more confused. He could not help but ask. I want to marry a wife. No, he did not want to marry a wife. Su Miaolan alone was enough to make him hate her. He did not want to marry a wife. The old eunuch asked in astonishment. Could it be that your highness wants to break off the engagement? He showed an awkward expression. But, tomorrow is the wedding. Wedding? Gong Che suddenly woke up from his dream. He looked at his hands and his mind became clearer. He looked at his clothes again and finally could not help but touch his face. He suddenly thought of something and the drunkenness disappeared in an instant. He looked everywhere for a mirror. In the end, he almost rushed in front of a bronze mirror. This mirror was not the mercury mirror that he often used in the Eastern Palace, but it could still reflect his appearance. He looked younger. No, it should be said that he looked younger than the 30-year-old in his dream. He was still 22 years old. But they were both 22 years old, and with Moer's help, his journey had been smooth sailing. There was no such melancholy between his brows, and his physique was not as frail as it was now. His current appearance was as if he had not met Moer, and had been living a miserable life. At this time, he still did not know that he had returned to his previous life. At that time, the Empress was dead and the Liu family had fallen. Even if Gong Che was very motivated and studious, his heart was deep and he had great ambitions. But those old foxes who ate people without spitting out the bones did not think highly of him. At this time, Gong Shu, Gong Qi, and Gong Dai were all highly sought-after princes in the palace. Although he was the crown prince, he was not good at scheming. Without help, he naturally could not succeed. Seeing that the crown prince did not seem to recognize him, the old eunuch was puzzled and walked over to ask softly, Your Highness, are you drunk? Still not awake? Did you just say that I want to marry a wife? Gong Che suddenly turned his head and stared at this eunuch whom he had never seen before. In an instant, his domineering aura was revealed. He was not the unstable and depressed crown prince of his previous life. He had undergone the baptism of the imperial court, the support of Gong Yimo, and the polishing of power and benefits to become the new emperor. The moment his eyes glanced over, the old eunuch's heart actually trembled. What was going on? Why did he suddenly feel that the crown prince seemed to have changed into a different person? Had he become stronger? He hurriedly lowered his head and answered, Yes. Tomorrow is your highness' wedding day. Gong Che heard this and deeply frowned. His expression turned solemn. His appearance made the old eunuch tremble. He felt that his highness was displeased and it made him want to kneel down and beg for mercy. He really did kneel down. Your highness. Is there something wrong? Gong Che's mind was in a mess. He was still the crown prince, still the Gong Che, but he wanted to marry a Miss Shang. Moreover, he was in such a poor state. Combined with the old eunuch's words, it seemed that Imperial Mother had died and the Liu family had declined. Then in this space-time, he did not meet Moer? He asked with some apprehension, Where is the seventh princess, Gong Yimo? The old eunuch listened to his cold reprimand and cold sweat flowed down his back. replying to your highness, in the palace, there is only the 6th princess, there is no 7th princess. Gong Chei's vision darkened. His hands supported himself on the mirror and he only felt that he could not suppress the anger in his heart. Damn it! Did the heavens let him live another life just to tease him? No. He had to first cancel this troublesome marriage and then go find Mo-er. He believed that no matter which spacetime it was, she would be there. Mo-er, you must wait for me. Chapter 629. The bottom of the stairway to heaven was uninhabited. Other than the fact that there were cliffs on both sides and no roads leading to this place was also a forbidden area. There were strict checkpoints set up, so more and more people could not reach this place. After the founding emperor established the capital, he decided to dig a moat on top of the original natural river, the Soaring Dragon River, regardless of the situation after the war. At that time, some sorcerers said that this place was Dai Yu State's Dragon Vein. However, the Dragon Vein had just been formed and could easily change. They needed to dig a water dragon to protect the Dragon Vein. Under the nourishment of the water dragon, the weak Dragon Vein would gradually grow stronger. In the long run, in less than 3 generations, Dai Yu State would definitely be able to create a golden age. It would follow the fate of the country for thousands of years. Therefore, they spent a lot of manpower and money to dig the Soaring Dragon River from the bottom of the stairway to heaven. At this time, several boats were going against the current. They were all solemn and silent as they avoided countless reefs and stones. Finally, they reached the bottom of the stairway to heaven, a forbidden area that had been sealed for hundreds of years. The leading mahogany boat gently touched the shore. A black boot embroidered with a dark silver 4-clawed flood dragon stepped on the shore, breaking the silence. This was Dai Yu State's forbidden area, but it was also a place as beautiful as a fairyland. On both sides of the canyon were knife-like canyons. Flowing water that looked like blue silk flowed through the canyons. Occasionally, birds would fly by, leaving behind endless chirping sounds. The sunlight quietly illuminated this place. The black soil would reflect the lustrous light because it was dotted with round pearls. For hundreds of years, every time there was a large-scale ceremony, everyone would throw down pearls from the altar of the stairway to heaven to pray for their blessings. Gong Dai could not help but look up. The 9 steps of the stairway to heaven towered into the clouds in front of him. According to legend, this was the place where God ascended step by step. It was also the place where the founding empress died. Gong Dai suddenly clenched his fist. It was also the place where the royal sister wanted to commit suicide. Gong Dai's subordinates used relatively dense wood to build more than 10 boats that were not afraid of the dangerous shoals. They were able to go against the current so that they could reach this place smoothly. The forbidden area was indeed a forbidden area. Without enough money and resources, others could not enter at all. Soon, a guard's voice was heard. "Prince, His Majesty has been found." However, this discovery could only be a corpse. This was because when they entered, they could see everything. It was a canyon that seemed to have been carved out by a knife. There was no living person standing on the shoal. Hearing this, Gong Dai turned around and walked towards Gong Chei. He walked slowly, his shoes sinking into the mud. It was called a bank, but it was not. There was no shore at the bottom of the sky stairway. It was just a half-dried riverbed left behind by the receding water. His every step was very slow, and his face was calm, as if he was stepping on the top of everyone's hearts. No one dared to raise their heads. Gong Dai walked step by step to Gong Chei's side. His heart sank. It was obvious that Gong Chei had been washed ashore by the rising tide at night. His skin was white from being soaked in water, and his lips were a deep purple. The imperial physician who accompanied them trembled as he went to check Gong Chei's body. He thought that if the Empress knew, she would probably faint again. His Majesty is indeed dead. What a pity. He hasn't officially ascended the throne yet. Why did he want to die with the princess? Gong Dai stared at Gong Chei's face. He was so lifeless, lying there coldly, and would never wake up again. The imperial physician quickly found the result. He knelt in the wetland and respectfully said. Replying to Prince, His Majesty died because his spine was broken. Gong Dai suddenly raised his eyebrows slightly, but did not say anything. At that time, the royal sister had rushed towards the cliff. He had wanted to pull her back, but his legs could not move. Instead, it was Gong Che who had rushed forward and carried the royal sister down the cliff. At first, he thought that Gong Che wanted to die with love, but after thinking about it, it was not right. Gong Che's actions replayed in his mind again and again, in slow motion. He did not miss a single detail. At that time, the royal sister had been facing the cliff, but he seemed to have seen Gong Che rush up to hug her, and then use his feet to kick the stone wall in a strange position. Gong Dai had experimented countless times in his mind. When he saw Gong Che's corpse, he was finally sure that his guess was correct. Using the stone wall as a stepping stone was to fall further, so that when they fell, they would not fall on the natural stone steps. And that position, after Gong Che hugged the royal sister, he used that position to flip her over and fall with her back facing the cliff. These two seemingly useless actions were very likely to save the royal sister's life. After using the stone wall as a stepping stone, they would fall into the water, and Gong Che himself would be under the royal sister. After falling into the water, he would take the full brunt of the impact. Although the royal sister would also take the brunt of the impact, but she would not necessarily die. At this time, Gong Dai could not help but look at Gong Che. And Gong Che, who did this, would definitely die. For a moment, Gong Dai did not know what to feel, but he felt a trace of respect for him. He was grateful to this love rival who had always tried to compete with him for the royal sister. At least in the end, he used his greatest strength to save the royal sister's life. When everyone saw that Gong Dai did not say a word, they did not dare to make a sound. After searching around, Luo Xiaoqi knelt in front of Gong Dai. Your Highness, the princess was not found. In the end, this was still good news. Since they did not see the corpse, there was still hope, right? Everyone bowed their heads and waited for Gong Dai's order. After waking up this time, Gong Dai had changed a lot. He stood there in a black robe. Even if he did not speak, he gave people an inexplicable pressure. His tall figure made people not dare to look directly at him, as if they were looking at a mountain. Luo Xiaoqi, who used to be lively in front of Gong Dai, did not dare to act rashly. He knelt on the ground respectfully and felt a little apprehensive. All the imperial guards are to be mobilized. Increase the search force and search the villages and towns along the river. Before tomorrow, this king wants to have news of the royal sister. Yes. Gong Dai lowered his eyes. Under Shi Fei's grey and black sword-like eyebrows, a pair of deep and serene eyes were looking at Gong Che quietly. Bring him back. Yes. Everyone hurriedly moved. Their movements were swift, and they did not dare to delay at all. Gong Ju watched as Gong Che was carried to the boat. Gong Ju averted his gaze and once again looked at the broken ladder. Gong Che, seeing that you tried your best to protect the royal sister, this king will take care of your empress mother. As long as she does not seek death. Everyone boarded the boat once again. This place had a panoramic view. Furthermore, the water level would rise every night. Gong Che's corpse had been washed ashore, but the princess. She wasn't here. She could only have been washed away. It was unknown if there was any news from the people who searched the river last night. The king would be back soon. If they did not find anything, they were afraid. Everyone did not dare to think further. When they turned back, they saw Gong Dai standing on the shore with his back facing them. The knife-like rocks, the black soil, the white pearls, and the light blue water were not as conspicuous as that back view. Chapter 630. His silver-grey hair was tied up simply. He looked up at the mountain wall, as if he was thinking about something. Luo Xiaoqi couldn't help but think of the officials who left Qi Mansion with ashen faces last night. After the prince got up, everyone was waiting by the bed, waiting for him to say something to calm them down and intimidate those who had some strange thoughts after hearing the bad news. The candlelight flickered, and the silver-grey hair seemed to be shining with starlight. Why should I preside over the situation? This was the first sentence Gong Dai said as he looked at the people in front of him coldly. He wouldn't forget that these people had accused him of marrying the royal sister. Now that they needed his help, they came to beg him again. Therefore, his words caused everyone's expression to change. I swore that if I didn't reach the top, I wouldn't be an emperor. He smiled as he enjoyed those surprised expressions, but that icy chill made everyone present unable to say a single word of persuasion. Now, get out. Luo Xiaoqi shivered when he thought of this. He always felt that the prince seemed to be different. Although he still looked cold and cheerless after waking up, that pressure, that kind of aura that made people's hearts tremble, seemed to have been released. But there were not many people who noticed this. It seemed that someone was going to be in big trouble. This side was strictly guarded, but on the other side, Gong Yimo, who was in disguise, was walking on the street with Qiu Xingfeng. She touched her face and asked strangely, "Master, why do I have to disguise myself?" Qiu Xingfeng was originally a fool. At first, he didn't allow Gong Yimo to call him master, or asked her why she called him master. But Gong Yimo looked at him strangely and said, "You are my master. If I don't call you master, what should I call you?" He didn't know what to do. He thought that Gong Yimo might have broken her head. He'd better not argue with a fool. So, under her insistence, Qiu Xingfeng didn't want to argue with a fool, so he had to accept this title. He wanted to stay away from this woman who always hurt him, but when he thought about the child in her stomach, this feeling was so strange. He wanted to be close to her again. Hearing her question, Qiu Xingfeng felt a bit guilty. Would he say that he was worried that Gong Dai would come to find him and find out that he had done something terrible to his royal sister? So for the first time in his life, Qiu Xingfeng lied. "You have a very powerful enemy. Have you forgotten that you are covered in wounds? If you don't disguise yourself, you'll be caught." At the mention of this, Gong Yimo felt a little scared. Last night, when they stayed at the inn, she saw the wounds on her body and gasped. How could it be so tragic? However, the strange thing was that her wound healed very quickly. It was so fast that it felt strange. She felt a little uneasy and thought that it was because her master's medicine was surprisingly effective. However, although the wound healed very quickly, it still hurt. Gong Yimo didn't know that Qiu Xingfeng would also lie. After all, they had known each other for more than 10 years. He was just a naive and sweet guy. She would never have thought that one day she would be cheated by a naive and sweet guy. The wound hurt so much that her legs trembled. With a disguised male face, she held his hand and said, "What should I do? The wound hurts so much. I can't walk anymore. Should I carry you?" Qiu Xingfeng said subconsciously. Even though he was forced to have a child, this poor guy still didn't learn how to be careful between men and women. Gong Yimo looked at the people around them. She resisted the urge to challenge the ancient people's ability to accept and said with a bitter face, "I'll be fine if you hold me. Quick, I feel dizzy." Qiu Xingfeng hurried to hold her. He thought helplessly that he had no choice. But they had a child. Qiu Xingfeng wasn't stupid. He was actually very smart. He secretly suspected this, so yesterday when Gong Yimo was resting, he went out to find someone and asked carefully. It was a very busy street at night. A woman grabbed him for no reason. He was worried that he couldn't find someone to ask, so he asked her, "Girl, can I ask you a few questions?" The gorgeously dressed girl had originally come out to solicit customers, but she was immediately captivated by the clean and handsome Qiu Xingfeng. She, who had long forgotten the meaning of modesty, was actually stunned by the clean aura on his body, and somewhat embarrassedly withdrew her hand from the other party. She said sweetly, "Young master, please ask. Why don't we go into the room and have a good talk?" As she said, she threw a coquettish glance at him. But coquettish glances were definitely thrown to the blind. Qiu Xingfeng opened a pair of innocent eyes that didn't match his age and asked seriously, "After a man and a woman see each other openly, will they get pregnant?" Although he asked this in a very serious tone, Hua Niang didn't hear his desire for knowledge at all. She giggled, took Qiu Xingfeng's hand again, and said coquettishly, "I've been in love for more than 10 years. I didn't expect that I would make a mistake." He looked like a fairy-like virgin, but she didn't expect him to know how to pretend. As soon as he opened his mouth, he revealed his true nature. This kind of flirting wasn't something that ordinary people could think of. "Young master, do you want to know?" she asked in a sweet voice. Seeing Cho Xingfeng frown, she thought, "Pretend? You're still pretending?" Cho Xingfeng took back his hand and said very sincerely, "Yes, miss, do you know? If you know, tell me." His acting was really good. Hua Niang threw a coquettish glance again. To deal with this kind of man, she had to go along with him. If he wanted to act, she would just play along with him. So she coquettishly leaned over and said softly, "Young master, you'll know whether you'll have a child or not after you try it." Cho Xingfeng resisted the urge to push her away and maintained this polite smile. "Will you or won't you?" Hua Niang smiled gently, "Yes. As long as young master wants, I'll give you a child tonight." After getting their accurate answer, Cho Xingfeng's face instantly turned bitter, as if he was in a funeral. He couldn't lie to himself anymore. He really did have a child by accident. No wonder senior sister always told him to be careful between men and women. It was really dangerous. The disheartened Cho Xingfeng turned and left Flower Lane, completely ignoring the vexed Hua Niang behind him. Damn it, what did she say wrong? Why did he leave just like that? She thought she could have a one-night stand with this fairy-like young master, but now it was all ruined. Hua Niang was so angry that she stomped her feet. After returning to the inn, Cho Xingfeng didn't go to his room, but to Gong Yimo's room. Because Gong Yimo lost all her martial arts and was pregnant, she was particularly sleepy, so she didn't notice. Naturally, she didn't know how bitter and hateful Cho Xingfeng was as he sat by her bed. He struggled for a while, and finally, touched Gong Yimo's belly. Gong Yimo woke up, patted his hand, and asked vigilantly, "What are you doing?" Chapter 631. Recently, she felt that her master was acting weird. Was he on drugs again tonight? Poor Gong Yimo would never think that Cho Xingfeng would do something bad to her. She had observed him carefully and found that Cho Xingfeng was not enlightened yet. Cho Xingfeng panicked when he saw that she was awake, but that panic immediately turned into determination. "Seeing that I accidentally got you pregnant, I've decided. I won't hate you anymore." Hey! Gong Yimo was confused. Cho Xingfeng continued, "I will be a good father, just like my senior." He was in a dilemma. He had seen his senior teaching children, and it didn't seem that difficult. Hey! Gong Yimo was confused. "Anyway." He blushed, "Anyway, I will start being good to you, for the sake of the child." Hey! Before Gong Yimo could react, Cho Xingfeng had already gone out like a gust of wind. Gong Yimo was stunned. What was going on? Why did her master come out in the middle of the night and say a bunch of crazy things? Gong Yimo was worried. What should she do? She felt that her master had become more stupid recently. However, she couldn't remember a lot of things. She wasn't sure if her master's brain was damaged again, or if he had become stupid for no reason. She touched her belly with a face full of fear. "Baby, you are not stupid, are you?" A few days had passed. The capital was overcast, and there were fewer people on the streets. Everyone was in danger. A large number of imperial guards went in and out of the city gate every day. However, at this time, there were still people who were not afraid of death and had some thoughts that they shouldn't have. After Gong Chei's body was found, the empress fainted as expected. After waking up, she cried every day and lay on the bed. The matters in the court were temporarily handled by the 6 cabinet ministers. Although it was fine for a day or two, after a long time, Daiyu state would be in chaos. In such a chaotic situation, they had to hold a national funeral. Because 2 generations of emperors had to be buried at once, this funeral could be said to be unprecedented. The Empress Dowager and Empress cried until they fainted again and again. The princesses and princes also cried out Imperial Father and Imperial Brother. Those who didn't know would really think that they were heartbroken. The weather in the early winter was unusually cold. On the last day of the national funeral, it even rained gloomily. The long funeral procession walked in the middle of the street. There were people kneeling on both sides. White mourning cloth flew in the air. The whole city was filled with grief. They were scared and panicked by this sudden tragedy. The country losing its pillars one after another. This was a prelude to the country. Thinking about this, the atmosphere became heavier. From the beginning of the funeral to the end, Gongju did not appear. He was holding a piece of red cloth in his hand. The unique embroidery on it indicated that this was the wedding dress that Imperial Sister had worn that day. The Imperial Army had mobilized in full force, but they could not find Imperial Sister. They only found this piece of cloth in the river. "Sister Royal, are you still alive?" "Momo." Gong Dai tightened his grip on the cloth and carefully placed it in his arms. He raised his head and took a big gulp of wine. At this time, Gongju sat high on the city wall, watching the funeral procession go away. The white mourning clothes and the gloomy sky made the world completely lose its color. Gongju was already numb. He tilted the bottle and poured the wine down. "Father, brother, rest in peace." The wine was poured out. At this time, his handsome face in the dark space had a kind of oppressive coldness. His hand tightened, and the entire white jade wine bottle turned into ashes at his fingertips. When he scattered it, it disappeared like ashes. Someone walked up behind him. "Your Highness." Gong Dai didn't turn around. He narrowed his eyes and watched the funeral procession leave. Bai Sheng's heart trembled. Just now, he saw the prince silently crush the wine bottle. In that moment, his body revealed a murderous aura that could devour people. It was as if he could easily crush someone's neck. The prince's martial arts must be the best in the world, right? Seeing that the prince ignored him, he swallowed his saliva and said softly, "I don't know who spread rumors among the people that His Majesty died because of the princess's madness. They also said that the crown prince died for the princess. This caused many students to be dissatisfied. There were even people who wrote a joint petition to question the cause. The students of Dai Yu State had a lot of power. They could write a joint petition to denounce the rumors. This was a rule set when Emperor Gong was still alive. It was to not be deceived and to listen to the voices of the people. Gong Dai's lips curved slightly. The wind blew his silver-gray hair. His black clothes were like ink. The two cold colors collided, pale and cold. Seeing that the prince still didn't answer, Bai Sheng sighed and continued. Those restless people not only wanted to smear the princess's reputation. Some even ordered their subordinates to submit a memorial and ask why the prince didn't erect a cenotaph for the princess. Those people had thought it through. If Gong Yimo was really fine, as long as the news of her death was announced, she would no longer be the princess when she returned. Moreover, Prince Qi didn't seem to care about anything. If they didn't act now, when would they? Royal Sister's cenotaph. Gongju finally opened his mouth to speak, but his elegant voice immediately gave Bai Sheng goosebumps. He controlled himself and knelt there steadily, not daring to raise his head. Royal Sister is not dead. How can there be a cenotaph? Bai Sheng paused and said under the strong pressure, "They all said that the princess is dead. Her body has been eaten by the fish and can't be found." Before he could finish speaking, a crushing pressure came crashing down on him. All his words were stuck in his throat, and he couldn't say a word. Her body was not preserved and couldn't be found. Gong Dai coldly looked at Captain Gong, who had gone far away, and revealed a cold smile. He stood up. Standing on the edge of the city wall, he would fall if he moved a little bit forward. But the more he looked, the more he couldn't see the danger under his feet. A gust of wind rose. Not only did it raise his hair and robe, it also swept up countless paper money and flew into the sky. The mournful music was endless, and the world was mournful. He stretched out his hand and caught a flying paper money. The white paper on his fingertips, the beige copper paper, and the flapping of his sleeves gave off an indescribable sense of danger and impactful beauty. But no one dared to look up. Do you think Imperial Father still needs a few people to serve him? He looked at the paper money and laughed. How could Bai Sheng dare to answer? That cold voice and the naked killing intent made people's scalps tingle. It was only those people who dared to touch the prince's reverse scale. If they didn't act on the prince would be busy looking for the princess and wouldn't have time to pay attention to them. It was still the same saying, the evils brought on by oneself were the hardest to bear. Zhaoyang Hall, the imperial court was in a mess. No one came out to preside over the situation for 10 days, which made many people's hearts waver. Many people were dissatisfied with the orders given by the cabinet ministers, and quarreled in the imperial court. Everyone was dressed in black. Because it was still the mourning period, many people's faces were heavy. All these changes were the signs of unrest. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.